She was worth $400 million, and she couldn't pay for a $5 coffee. Charlotte Reeves stood frozen at the Starbucks counter, her corporate card rejected, a line of impatient strangers watching the most powerful woman in tech turn crimson with humiliation. Then a hand reached past her, weathered, steady, belonging to a security guard she'd never noticed, and laid down a crumpled $10 bill. "I got it," he said quietly. Their eyes met. And in that single moment, neither of them knew that a declined card would build a family, that a stranger's kindness would rewrite two broken lives, and that the man in the uniform was hiding the kind of brilliance that could change everything. If you want to see how one small act of grace turned into the love story neither of them expected, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The Monday morning sun cut sharp angles through Manhattan's glass towers, turning the city into a cathedral of ambition and exhaust fumes. Charlotte Reeves moved through the crowd like a woman who had somewhere to be and no patience for anyone who didn't. Her heels struck the pavement in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, controlled, precise, unrelenting. She was 38 years old, the founder and CEO of Tech Vision Industries, and she hadn't taken a vacation in 3 years. Not because she couldn't afford one, her net worth had crossed the 400 million mark last quarter, but because she couldn't afford to stop. The moment she stopped, the moment she let her guard down, someone would notice. Someone would see the cracks beneath the polished exterior and wonder if Charlotte Reeves was really as invincible as she appeared. The Starbucks on 42nd Street was her Monday ritual. Not because she needed the caffeine, her assistant kept a French press in her office that cost more than most people's furniture, but because this was where normal people went. For 15 minutes every Monday morning, Charlotte Reeves could pretend she was just another professional grabbing coffee before work, just another face in the crowd, just another woman who worried about deadlines and traffic and whether she'd remembered to send that email. The line was long today, 12 people deep, snaking past the pastry display and almost to the door. Charlotte checked her watch, a Patek Philippe that her father had given her when she made her first million, and calculated. 8 minutes, maybe 10. She could spare that. The board meeting didn't start until 9, and her driver was waiting at the curb. She was thinking about quarterly projections when she reached the counter. The barista was young, maybe 22, with tired eyes and a name tag that said Marcus. "Grande oat milk latte," Charlotte said, already reaching for her wallet. "Extra shot. That'll be $6.47. She pulled out her corporate card. The black Amex that had never failed her, that had purchased private jets and penthouse suites and enough server capacity to power a small country, and handed it over with the automatic confidence of someone who had never worried about money in her adult life. Marcus swiped the card. Nothing happened. He swiped it again, frowning at the screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's being declined." Charlotte felt the words before she understood them. Declined. The card that had a limit high enough to buy this entire Starbucks franchise was being declined in front of a Monday morning crowd. "That's impossible," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Run it again." Marcus ran it again. The machine beeped its rejection. Behind her, someone sighed audibly. Someone else muttered something about people holding up the line. Charlotte's face flushed hot. Not from embarrassment, she told herself, from irritation. This was a technical error. A glitch in the system. She would have someone fired for this. "Do you have another card?" Marcus asked, and there was something in his voice that made Charlotte want to disappear. Not judgment exactly, but something worse. Pity. She fumbled through her wallet, past the black Amex to the Platinum Visa, the MasterCard she kept for international travel, the debit card linked to her personal account that she hadn't used in 3 years. Her hands were shaking slightly. When had they started shaking? And she couldn't seem to find any card that wasn't attached to Tech Vision's accounts. "Ma'am, there's a line," someone called out. Charlotte's spine stiffened. She turned, ready to deliver the kind of cutting remark that had made junior executives cry in boardrooms when a hand reached past her. The hand was weathered, the knuckles scarred, the nails clean but unmanicured. It belonged to a man in a security guard uniform, the navy blue polyester kind that every corporate building in Manhattan seemed to issue, and it was holding a crumpled $10 bill. "I got it," the man said. Charlotte looked up. He was tall, taller than her even in her heels, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes the color of coffee without cream. There were lines around those eyes, the kind that came from squinting into sun, or from grief, or from both. He wasn't handsome in the way that the men Charlotte usually noticed were handsome. No sharp jaw or designer stubble or gym-sculpted physique, but there was something in his face that made her forget, for a moment, that she was standing in a Starbucks with a declined card and a line of strangers watching her humiliation. "That's not necessary," she heard herself say. "It's just coffee." He smiled slightly, and the lines around his eyes deepened. "Figured you could use a break from fighting with that machine." Before she could protest again, Marcus had taken the bill, made change, and moved on to the next customer. The security guard stepped aside, gesturing for Charlotte to wait at the pickup counter while he ordered his own drink. Just a regular coffee, black, the cheapest thing on the menu. She should have left. She should have grabbed her coffee the moment the barista called her name, walked out the door, and never thought about this again. By tomorrow, she would have resolved whatever billionaire had caused the declined card. By next week, she would have forgotten this had ever happened. But something kept her standing there, next to the pickup counter, next to the man in the security uniform. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll pay you back." "Don't worry about it." He was looking at her with something that wasn't quite curiosity, wasn't quite recognition. Happens to everybody sometime. "Not to me," she said, and immediately regretted it. It sounded arrogant. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing that rich people said in movies when they were about to learn a valuable lesson about humility. But the security guard just nodded, like he understood. "First time for everything." "Grande oat milk latte," the barista called, "and a large black coffee." They reached for their drinks at the same time, and Charlotte noticed the name tag on his uniform. Ethan Cole, Building Security, West Tower. West Tower. That was her building. This man worked in her building, and she had never noticed him, had never looked twice at the security desk she passed every morning, had never registered the face of anyone who wasn't senior management or board level. "You work at Tech Vision," she said, and it wasn't a question. Ethan Cole nodded. "Night shift mostly. Been there about 8 months." "I'm Charlotte Reeves." She extended her hand and watched something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of a different kind. Everyone in the building knew her name, even if they'd never met her. She was the face on the website, the signature on the company-wide emails, the legend who had built a tech empire before she turned 30. But Ethan Cole just shook her hand like she was anyone, like she was just a woman he'd bought coffee for on a Monday morning. "Nice to meet you, Ms. Reeves." His grip was firm, his palm calloused. "Have a good day." And then he was gone, walking out into the Manhattan morning, just another person in the crowd. Charlotte stood there for a long moment, holding her coffee, feeling the weight of something she couldn't name. Then her phone buzzed, her assistant reminding her about the board meeting, and the spell broke. She was Charlotte Reeves again. She had a company to run. But all the way to the office, she couldn't stop thinking about the security guard's eyes. The boardroom at Tech Vision Industries occupied the entire 47th floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, a conference table made from reclaimed wood that had cost more than most people's houses, and leather chairs soft enough to make even the most hostile investor feel comfortable. Charlotte hated this room. She hated the way the light caught the glass at certain angles, making it impossible to read people's faces. She hated the way the acoustics carried every whisper, every cleared throat, every subtle shift of power. Most of all, she hated the way these meetings made her feel, like a performer on a stage, playing the role of confident CEO, while something inside her wondered when they would all see through the act. Today's meeting was supposed to be routine, quarterly projections, budget allocations, the usual dance of numbers and graphs that kept the shareholders happy. But the moment Charlotte walked in and saw Grant Blackwood sitting at the head of the table, her seat, the seat she had earned with 10 years of her life, she knew this wouldn't be routine at all. "Charlotte." Grant stood, extending his hand with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Thanks for joining us." She took his hand because she had to. "Grant, I wasn't expecting you." "Last-minute decision." Figured I'd check in on my investment. He gestured around the room like he owned it, which, in a way, he did. Blackwood Capital held 18% of TechVision shares, enough to make any CEO nervous. Charlotte took her seat, the one to the right of the head, now that Grant had claimed the center. The other board members filed in, some sympathetic, some carefully neutral, all watching to see how this would play out. "I've been reviewing your Q3 numbers," Grant said, sliding a folder across the table. "Interesting reading." Charlotte didn't open the folder. She knew what was in it. She'd written most of it herself. "We're up 7% from last quarter, ahead of projections across all major metrics." "Ahead, yes, but not as far ahead as we could be." Grant steepled his fingers, a gesture Charlotte had seen him use 1,000 times. It meant he was about to say something he thought was clever. "I've been looking at your staffing costs, specifically your hiring practices." "What about them?" "You're leaving money on the table, Charlotte. Every position you fill with an overqualified candidate, every salary you negotiate above market rate, every—" he paused for effect. "Charity case you hire out of some misguided sense of social responsibility? It adds up." Charlotte felt her jaw tighten. "Our hiring practices are designed to attract the best talent." "Are they?" Grant pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "Let me read you something. Last month, your HR department rejected an application for senior security position. Candidate had an engineering degree from MIT, 4 patents to his name, 15 years of experience at Fortune 500 companies. Know why they rejected him?" Charlotte said nothing. She knew where this was going. 3-year gap in his employment history, Grant continued. No explanation, just nothing. 3 years of nothing, and your HR team flagged it as suspicious and moved on. He set the phone down. "Now, I'm not saying we should hire every candidate with a sketchy resume, but this guy was giving us top-tier qualifications for a security guard's salary. That's the kind of deal we should be jumping on." "There are privacy considerations," Charlotte said carefully. "Employment gaps aren't necessarily suspicious. People have reasons. People have excuses." Grant's smile sharpened. "The question is whether we can afford to pay for other people's excuses." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, but Charlotte barely heard any of it. Her mind kept circling back to the security guard in the Starbucks, the one who had paid for her coffee with a crumpled $10 bill. Ethan Cole. Building security, West Tower, MIT engineering degree, 4 patents, 15 years of experience, 3-year gap that had gotten him rejected for a job he was wildly overqualified for. As soon as the meeting ended, Charlotte returned to her office and pulled up the HR database. It took her 20 minutes to find the file. Ethan Cole's application for senior security analyst, submitted 8 months ago, rejected after a preliminary screening. She opened the file and started reading. What she found made her heart drop into her stomach. Ethan Cole had graduated from MIT at 22, summa cum laude, with dual degrees in electrical engineering and computer science. By 25, he'd filed his first patent, a cybersecurity protocol that was still being used by government agencies. By 30, he was a senior systems architect at a defense contractor, designing secure communications networks for the military. Then, 3 years ago, everything stopped. No jobs, no patents, no publications. Just silence. Charlotte scrolled further, looking for any clue about what had happened. The file was sparse, just the basic application information. A resume that ended abruptly in 2022, and a single note from HR. Candidate refused to explain employment gap, flagged for concerns. She should have stopped there. Ethan Cole's personal life was none of her business. He was a security guard who had paid for her coffee, nothing more, nothing less. But Charlotte had built her career on asking questions that other people were afraid to ask, and right now she couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at something that didn't add up. She picked up her phone and dialed her assistant. "Karen, I need you to run a background check. Full scope. Name is Ethan Cole." There was a pause on the other end. "Ms. Reeves, that's a current employee. There might be privacy concerns. I'm aware. Do it anyway." She hung up and turned to look out the window. 47 floors below, the streets of Manhattan churned with people, all of them carrying stories she would never know. Problems she would never understand, lives that existed entirely outside the bubble of quarterly projections and shareholder meetings. Somewhere down there, Ethan Cole was probably starting his shift, walking the halls of a building owned by a company that had rejected him for no good reason, wearing a uniform that said security guard when his resume said genius. Charlotte thought about the crumpled $10 bill, about the way he'd said, "It's just coffee," like it was nothing. She thought about Grant Blackwood's smile, about the way he'd said charity case, like it was a dirty word. And she thought about the kind of leader she wanted to be, the kind of company she wanted to run, versus the kind of system she had helped create. The background check arrived in her inbox 2 hours later. Charlotte read it 3 times, and by the end she was crying for the first time in years. The file told a story that no resume ever could. Ethan Cole had married his college sweetheart, a woman named Sarah, who taught elementary school in Brooklyn. They'd had 2 children, Emma, who was 7, and Noah, who was 5. 3 years ago, on a rain-slicked highway in upstate New York, a truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. Sarah and Emma died on impact. Noah was in the back seat, protected by a car seat that his father had insisted on installing himself, double-checking every strap and buckle because Ethan Cole was the kind of man who didn't leave anything to chance. Noah survived with a broken arm and a shattered world. Ethan had quit his job the next day, had moved out of the house he'd shared with Sarah, sold everything that reminded him of the life he'd lost, and dedicated himself entirely to keeping his son from falling apart. For 3 years, he'd been a full-time father, had driven Noah to therapy twice a week, had sat with him through the nightmares, had learned to cook the specific foods that Noah would eat and to read the specific books that helped Noah sleep. He'd burned through his savings, sold his patents for fractions of their worth, done whatever it took to give his son the stability that Ethan himself was barely holding on to. 8 months ago, when the money finally ran out, Ethan had started applying for jobs. Not the senior engineering positions he was qualified for, those required travel, late nights, the kind of commitment that would take him away from Noah, but entry-level positions. Security guards, night watchmen, anything that would let him be home when Noah needed him. Tech Vision had been one of a dozen companies that rejected him without explanation. Charlotte set the file down on her desk and stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she had never called before. Security desk, West Tower. "This is Cole." His voice was different over the phone, more guarded, more professional, but she would have recognized it anywhere. "Mr. Cole, this is Charlotte Reeves. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, my office." There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "A job offer," Charlotte said, "one I should have made 8 months ago." She hung up before he could respond, before she could second-guess herself, before the voice in her head that sounded like Grant Blackwood could talk her out of it. Then she turned back to the window and watched the sun set over Manhattan, painting the city in shades of gold and rose and possibility. Somewhere in this building, a man who had lost everything was finishing his shift, preparing to go home to a son who needed him more than any company ever could. Tomorrow, Charlotte was going to offer him a second chance. She just hoped she hadn't already cost him too much time. Thus, the next morning, Charlotte arrived at the office 2 hours early. She told herself it was because she had emails to catch up on, meetings to prepare for, the usual endless list of CEO responsibilities. But the truth was simpler. She couldn't sleep. All night, she'd been thinking about Ethan Cole, about the way he'd looked at her in the Starbucks, not with recognition or deference or any of the things she was used to seeing in people's eyes, but with something quieter, something that felt almost like understanding. She'd been thinking about his file, about the 3-year gap that HR had flagged as suspicious, about the wife and daughter he'd lost, the son he'd saved, the career he'd sacrificed. She'd been thinking about what it meant to be a leader, a real leader, not just someone who signed checks and made speeches, and whether she'd been failing at it all along. At 8:45, her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Reeves? Mr. Cole is here." Charlotte straightened her blazer, took a breath. "Send him in." Ethan Cole looked different in daylight. The fluorescent lights of the coffee shop had washed out his features, but here, in the natural light that flooded her corner office, she could see the details she'd missed. The gray in his hair wasn't just at the temples. It was scattered throughout, like frost on dark earth. The lines around his eyes were deeper than she'd realized, carved by years of grief that hadn't quite healed. His uniform was pressed and clean, but it hung slightly loose on his frame, as if he'd lost weight recently and hadn't bothered to adjust. But his eyes were the same, clear and steady, and holding something that Charlotte couldn't quite name. "Ms. Reeves," he said, stopping a respectful distance from her desk. "Thank you for the meeting. Please, sit." She gestured to one of the chairs across from her, then hesitated. "And call me Charlotte. Ms. Reeves makes me feel like my mother." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Charlotte, then." He sat, and Charlotte found herself unsure how to begin. All night she'd rehearsed what she wanted to say, practiced the corporate language of opportunity and second chances, the careful phrases that would make this feel like a business decision rather than an apology. But now, sitting across from this man who had paid for her coffee with money he probably couldn't spare, all those words felt hollow. "I read your file," she said finally. "Your real file. The application you submitted 8 months ago." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or resignation? "I see. MIT engineering, 4 patents, 15 years of experience that most people in this building would kill for." Charlotte leaned forward. "You applied for a senior security analyst position, and we rejected you because of a 3-year gap in your employment history. We didn't even call you for an interview?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. "I assume there's a reason you're telling me this." "I looked into the gap," Charlotte said. "I know what happened, and I want you to know that I'm sorry." "Sorry for what? The rejection or the reason behind it?" "Both." She met his gaze directly. "I built this company to be better than this. We have diversity initiatives and second chance programs and all sorts of policies that are supposed to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening. And none of it mattered because, when it came down to it, we looked at a piece of paper with a 3-year hole in it and decided that was more important than everything you'd accomplished." Ethan was silent again. Charlotte waited, watching emotions cross his face like clouds across a sky. Anger, grief, something that might have been hope. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked finally. "Why not 8 months ago, when I first applied?" "Because 8 months ago I didn't know you existed. I didn't know about your application, or your rejection, or—" She paused, weighing her words. "Any of it. I found out yesterday, after you paid for my coffee, and I realized I didn't even know the name of the man who works in my building. And now you do. And now I do." Charlotte straightened in her chair. "Which brings me to why I asked you here. I'd like to offer you a position at Tech Vision, not security, engineering, senior systems architect, reporting directly to our chief technology officer." Ethan's expression didn't change. "That's a significant jump from night watchman." "It's a jump back to where you belong." "Is it?" He leaned forward slightly, and Charlotte caught something in his eyes. Not anger, but something fiercer. "Ms. Reeves, Charlotte, I appreciate the offer, really, but I don't think you understand why I'm working security in the first place. I understand that you needed flexible hours, that you have a son who requires—" "Noah doesn't just require things." For the first time, Ethan's composure cracked just slightly. "He's 9 years old, and he lost his mother and his sister in the same moment. He spent 6 months unable to sleep without waking up screaming. He spent another year unable to be in a car without having panic attacks. He's better now, so much better, but he still needs me. Every morning, every afternoon, every time something reminds him of what we lost." Charlotte was quiet, letting him speak. "I took this job because it lets me be there for him," Ethan continued. "I work nights so I can take him to school. I work weekends so I can make his therapy appointments. I do security instead of engineering because nobody in security expects me to stay late for meetings or answer emails at midnight or sacrifice my son's well-being for quarterly projections." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was softer. "So before you offer me a position that pays 3 times what I'm making now, I need to know, what exactly are you asking me to give up?" Charlotte felt something shift inside her, something that had been stuck for a long time. Nothing, she said quietly. I'm asking you to give up nothing. I don't understand. The position I'm offering, it's not standard. The hours would be built around Noah's schedule. School pickup at 3, therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, whatever he needs. If he's sick, you stay home. If he has a nightmare and you're exhausted, you work from home or you don't work at all. This isn't a favor, Ethan. This is how work should be. We just forgot how to do it. Ethan stared at her. That's not how corporate jobs work. It's how this one is going to work. Charlotte stood, moving to the window. The city sprawled out below them, millions of lives intersecting and diverging. I've spent 10 years building a company that's supposed to change the world, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that changing the world starts with changing how we treat the people in it. She turned back to face him. Yesterday, you bought coffee for a stranger who couldn't pay for it herself. You didn't know who I was. You didn't do it to impress me or to get something in return. You did it because it was the right thing to do, and because— She paused, remembering the look in his eyes. Because you understood what it feels like to need help and not know how to ask for it. Ethan said nothing, but his expression had changed. The guarded wariness was still there, but underneath it, she could see something else. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. I'm not offering you this job because I feel guilty about what happened 8 months ago, Charlotte continued. I'm offering it because you're brilliant, because this company needs what you can do, and because I refuse to keep running an organization that throws away good people over boxes on a form. And if I say no, then you keep your security job for as long as you want it, with my personal guarantee that no one will ever question why. But I hope you won't say no. She sat back down, meeting his eyes. I hope you'll give me a chance to prove that this company can be better than the system that rejected you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Finally, Ethan spoke. I need to think about it. Of course. I need to talk to Noah. He doesn't handle change well, and this would be a lot of change. Take whatever time you need. Ethan stood, and Charlotte stood with him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two people carrying more than anyone could see, finding something unexpected in a Manhattan office 47 floors above the street where everything had started. Charlotte, Ethan said, and she noticed it was the first time he'd used her name. Why does this matter so much to you? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Charlotte thought about Grant Blackwood and his dismissive smile, about the board members who measured success in stock prices and efficiency metrics, about the girl she'd been before she became a CEO, the one who'd believed that business could be a force for good, that success and humanity weren't mutually exclusive. Because someone has to care, she said finally, and I'd rather it be me than someone who doesn't. Ethan nodded slowly, like he understood more than she'd said. I'll let you know by Friday. I'll be here. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. Charlotte. Yes? Thank you for reading the file, for seeing past it. And then he was gone, leaving Charlotte alone with the morning light and the weight of everything she was trying to change. She returned to her desk and pulled up the company's HR policies, already drafting the revisions that would reshape how TechVision hired, how it measured success, how it treated the human beings behind the resumes. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was a start. Outside her window, the city churned on, indifferent to the small revolution brewing in a corner office. But Charlotte wasn't looking at the city anymore. She was thinking about a crumpled $10 bill and a man who had nothing and still gave, and the way a single act of kindness could crack open a world that had forgotten how to be kind. Friday felt very far away. Ethan Cole walked out of TechVision Tower and into the Manhattan afternoon, his mind churning with everything that had just happened. The sun was too bright. The noise was too loud. Everything felt heightened, sharpened, like he'd just stepped out of a dream into a reality that was more vivid than the one he'd left behind. A job offer. A real job offer, for real money, with conditions that sounded too good to be true. He'd spent 3 years learning not to trust things that sounded too good to be true. His phone buzzed, a text from the babysitter. Noah ate lunch, working on homework, says he wants pizza for dinner. Ethan smiled despite himself. Pizza for dinner was Noah's answer to everything. Good day at school? Pizza. Bad day at school? Pizza. Dad got offered a job that could change their lives? Definitely pizza. He typed back a quick response, then started walking. He had 2 hours before he needed to pick Noah up. 2 hours to think, to process, to figure out whether Charlotte Reeves was sincere, or whether this was just another corporate trap dressed up in pretty words. The walk from Midtown to Brooklyn took him through the parts of the city he'd learned to love since Sarah died. The coffee shops where baristas knew his order without asking. The park benches where he'd sat with Noah on countless afternoons, watching pigeons and talking about nothing. The corner where an old man sold newspapers and always asked about Noah's school. These were the pieces of his new life, smaller than the life he'd had before, but solid, real. The kind of foundation you could build something on, even if you weren't sure what shape it would take. Could he risk that for a job? Could he afford not to? The apartment was quiet when he got home. The babysitter had left a note on the counter, Noah reading in his room, homework done, and Ethan stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the silence. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people at a time. It was nothing like the house they'd had before. The one with the backyard and the tire swing, and Sarah's garden full of tomatoes, but it was theirs. It was safe. Dad? Ethan turned. Noah was standing in the doorway, a book tucked under his arm, his dark hair sticking up in the way it always did when he'd been lying down. Hey, buddy, good day? Noah shrugged, the universal language of 9-year-old boys. It was okay. Mrs. Patterson gave us extra homework because Tyler wouldn't stop talking. That doesn't seem fair. That's what I said. Noah moved into the kitchen, opening the fridge and peering inside. Can we have pizza for dinner? Already ordered it, Ethan said, and Noah's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that made everything else worth it. They ate dinner at the kitchen table. Noah chattering about school and his friends, and the book he was reading, a fantasy novel about a boy who discovered he could talk to dragons. Ethan listened, asked questions, made all the right noises of interest and surprise. But part of him was still in that corner office, 47 floors above the street, listening to Charlotte Reeves talk about second chances. Dad? Ethan blinked. Yeah? You're doing that thing again. What thing? The thing where you're here, but you're not really here. Noah's eyes, Sarah's eyes, the same warm brown that Ethan saw every time he looked at his son, were watching him carefully. Is something wrong? Ethan set down his pizza slice. Nothing's wrong, buddy. I got some news today, and I'm trying to figure out what to do about it. What kind of news? Job news. Ethan hesitated, then decided Noah deserved the truth. Someone offered me a different job. A better one, with more money and different hours. Noah's face went still in the way it always did when something threatened to change. Would you have to go away? No. Never. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. That's the thing, Noah. This job, the person who offered it, she said I could still be here for everything. School pickup, therapy, all of it. She said that wouldn't change. Do you believe her? It was such a simple question, such an adult question from such a young face. I don't know, Ethan admitted. I want to, but I've learned to be careful about wanting things. Noah nodded slowly, processing. Is she nice? The person who offered the job? Ethan thought about Charlotte Reeves, her sharp eyes and careful words, the way she'd looked at him like she was seeing something more than a security guard in an ill-fitting uniform. I think so, he said. I think she's trying to be. Then maybe you should try too, Noah said, with the devastating clarity of a 9-year-old who hadn't yet learned to overthink everything. Mom always said that trying is the hardest part. Once you start trying, the rest just happens. Ethan felt his throat tighten. When did you get so smart? I was always smart. You just weren't paying attention. Noah grinned, that crooked grin that was all his own, and grabbed another slice of pizza. Can I have ice cream after this? You can have whatever you want, Ethan said, and meant it about so much more than dessert. Later that night, after Noah was in bed and the apartment was quiet, Ethan sat on the fire escape and watched the city lights blur into stars. He thought about Sarah, about the life they'd planned and the life that had taken its place. He thought about Noah, about how much his son had overcome and how much further they still had to go. And he thought about Charlotte Reeves, about the way she'd said, "Someone has to care," like it was the most obvious thing in the world. By Friday, he would have an answer. He just wasn't sure yet what it would be. Friday arrived like a held breath finally released. Ethan had spent the days between Charlotte's offer and his decision in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of his security shifts while his mind churned with possibilities and fears. He'd watched Noah carefully for signs of anxiety, for any indication that his son sensed the approaching change. But Noah had been remarkably steady, finishing his homework, reading his dragon books, asking for pizza with the same reliable enthusiasm. It was Ethan who couldn't sleep. Ethan who lay awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling of their small Brooklyn apartment, wondering if he was about to make the best decision of his life or the worst. On Thursday night, Noah had found him on the fire escape again. "Dad?" His son's voice was soft, thick with sleep. "Why are you still awake?" Ethan had made room on the narrow metal platform, and Noah had climbed out to sit beside him, their shoulders touching in the darkness. "Just thinking, buddy." "About the job?" "Yeah, about the job." Noah was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city lights. Then he said, "I think you should take it." Ethan turned to look at his son. "You do?" "You're always worried about money. I can tell, even when you try to hide it." Noah's voice was matter-of-fact, without accusation. "And you're really smart, Dad. Like, really smart. I've seen the stuff in your old notebooks, all the drawings and equations and things. You shouldn't be walking around checking doors at night." "There's nothing wrong with checking doors." "I know, but it's not what you're supposed to be doing." Noah looked up at him, and in the dim light, his eyes were so much like Sarah's that Ethan's chest ached. "Mom would want you to be happy. She would want you to do the thing you're good at." Ethan pulled his son close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "When did you grow up so much?" "I'm 9, Dad. I've been growing up the whole time. You just keep missing it because you're too busy worrying." They'd sat there together until Noah started shivering, and then Ethan had carried him back to bed, even though Noah insisted he was too old to be carried, and tucked him in with the worn stuffed elephant that had survived the accident along with them. Now, standing outside Charlotte Reeves's office on Friday morning, Ethan felt the weight of that conversation settling into certainty. Karen, Charlotte's assistant, looked up from her desk. "Mr. Cole?" "She's expecting you. Go right in." The door was already open. Charlotte stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light, and when she turned, Ethan saw something in her face that surprised him. Nervousness, uncertainty. Like she'd been holding her breath too. "Ethan." She gestured to the same chair he'd sat in 4 days ago. "Please." He didn't sit. Instead, he walked to the window and stood beside her, looking out at the city they both called home. "I talked to my son," he said, "told him about the offer, asked him what he thought." Charlotte waited, her hands clasped in front of her. "He told me that his mother would want me to be happy, that she would want me to do the thing I'm good at." Ethan turned to face her. He's 9 years old, and he understands things that most adults spend their whole lives missing. He sounds remarkable. He is. He's the best thing I've ever done. Ethan took a breath. "I'm going to accept your offer, Charlotte, but I need you to understand something first. Name it." Noah isn't a condition of employment. He isn't a box to check or a policy to implement. He's my son, and he comes first, always. If that ever becomes a problem, if there's ever a moment when this company needs me more than he does, I walk. No negotiation, no second chances. I just walk. Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "I wouldn't expect anything less." "Good." Ethan extended his hand. "Then I guess we have a deal." She shook it, and her grip was firm, certain. "Welcome to Tech Vision, Mr. Cole. The real Tech Vision, this time." For the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt something that might have been hope. The first weeks were harder than Ethan expected. Not the work itself. The work was familiar, comfortable, like slipping into clothes he'd forgotten he owned. Charlotte had assigned him to the cybersecurity division, working under a CTO named Marcus Webb, who was young, brilliant, and initially suspicious of the new hire who'd come with the CEO's personal recommendation. "So you're Charlotte's special project," Marcus said on Ethan's first day, leaning against the doorframe of the small office they'd assigned him. The security guard with the MIT degree. Ethan looked up from the computer he was configuring. "Is that going to be a problem?" "Depends." Marcus crossed his arms. "I've seen a lot of people come through here with impressive resumes and nothing to back them up. Charlotte's a visionary, but she's also an optimist. Sometimes she sees potential that isn't there." "And you think that's what's happening with me?" "I think I don't know you yet." Marcus pushed off the doorframe. "Prove me wrong, and we'll get along fine. Prove me right, and I'll make sure Charlotte knows she made a mistake." It was honest, at least. Ethan could respect honest. "Fair enough," he said. "Give me a month." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A month?" "A month. If I haven't proven myself by then, I'll save you the trouble and resign myself." A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. "I like confidence. Just make sure you can back it up." He left, and Ethan turned back to his computer, already running through the security architecture he'd been asked to review. The systems were good, better than most, but he could already see the vulnerabilities, the places where someone with the right knowledge could slip through unnoticed. This was what he was made for. This was what he'd been missing. But the work wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the people. TechVision's engineering division was young, ambitious, and deeply suspicious of anyone who didn't fit their pattern. They worked 70-hour weeks and bragged about it. They answered emails at midnight and wore their exhaustion like badges of honor. They looked at Ethan, with his 3 o'clock departures and his twice-weekly therapy appointments and his absolute refusal to work weekends, like he was speaking a foreign language. "Must be nice," a junior engineer named Derek muttered one afternoon, loud enough for Ethan to hear. "Having a free pass from the CEO." Ethan kept his eyes on his screen, his fingers steady on the keyboard. "It's not a free pass. It's a different schedule." "Right, a schedule that lets you leave while the rest of us are still working." Derek's voice was bitter, edged with the kind of resentment that came from too many late nights and not enough recognition. "Some of us actually have to earn our positions here." Ethan stopped typing. He turned in his chair, slowly, and looked at Derek with the same steady gaze he'd used to face down hostile generals in his defense contractor days. "You know what I did before I came here?" he asked quietly. "I designed security systems for the Department of Defense. I built protocols that are still being used to protect military communications overseas. I have 4 patents to my name and 15 years of experience that most people in this room haven't lived yet." Derek's face flushed. You didn't know. That's fine. Most people don't." Ethan turned back to his computer. "But before you assume someone got a free pass, you might want to consider that you don't know their whole story." The room had gone quiet. Ethan could feel the eyes on him, the recalibration happening in real time as people reassessed the quiet new hire who left at 3 o'clock. After that, the muttering stopped. The respect came slowly, in small moments that added up to something larger. It started with a bug in the authentication system, a subtle flaw that had been causing intermittent lockouts for months without anyone being able to identify the source. 3 senior engineers had spent weeks trying to track it down, and Marcus was getting pressure from Charlotte to fix it before it affected a major client. Ethan found it in 2 hours. "It's not in the code," he explained to Marcus, pulling up a diagram on his screen. "It's in the timing. The system is checking credentials against the wrong clock, the server's local time instead of UTC. Every time someone logs in from a different time zone, there's a chance the timestamps won't match." Marcus stared at the screen, then at Ethan. That's a rookie mistake. How did we miss that?" "Because you were looking for something complicated. Sometimes the simple answers are the hardest to see. And you saw it in 2 hours." "I've been staring at systems like this for 15 years. Ethan shrugged. "You learn to recognize patterns." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and clapped Ethan on the shoulder, the first physical contact anyone at TechVision had initiated with him. "Okay," Marcus said, "you've got my attention." From that point on, things shifted. People started coming to Ethan's desk with questions, seeking out his expertise instead of avoiding his office. The junior engineers who had whispered about his special treatment began asking for his advice on their own projects. Even Derek, the bitter muttering engineer, showed up one afternoon with a code problem he couldn't solve. "I heard you're good at finding bugs," Derek said, not quite meeting Ethan's eyes. "I've been stuck on this for 3 days." Ethan looked at the code, found the error in 20 minutes, and explained it in a way that helped Derek understand not just the fix, but the underlying principle. "Thanks," Derek said afterward, still not quite meeting Ethan's eyes. "And, sorry, about before." "Don't worry about it." Ethan turned back to his screen. "We all make assumptions. The trick is being willing to change them." Charlotte watched from a distance, saying nothing but seeing everything. She'd made it a point to keep her involvement minimal, to let Ethan prove himself on his own merits rather than under her protection. But she checked in with Marcus weekly, asking casual questions that weren't casual at all, tracking Ethan's progress through the subtle shifts in how people talked about him. "He's good," Marcus admitted after the authentication bug incident. "Really good. I was skeptical at first, but he's also different. He doesn't work the way we work. Leaves at 3, doesn't answer emails after 5, never stays late." Marcus shook his head. "And somehow he still gets more done than people who are here twice as long." "Maybe that's the point," Charlotte said quietly. "Maybe we've been measuring productivity wrong." Marcus looked at her with something new in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. "You really think he can change how we do things here?" "I think he already is. We just have to pay attention." But Charlotte's careful distance couldn't last forever. It ended on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Ethan started, when her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. "Grant Blackwood is here, says he needs to see you immediately." Charlotte felt her stomach tighten. Grant didn't make unannounced visits unless he wanted something, or unless he'd found something to use against her. She found him in the conference room, lounging in the chair at the head of the table like he owned it, which, she reminded herself bitterly, he partly did. "Charlotte." He gestured for her to sit. "We need to talk about your new hire." "Which one?" "Don't play games." Grant's smile was thin, sharp. "Ethan Cole. The security guard you promoted to senior systems architect because he bought you a cup of coffee." Charlotte kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. Grant had sources everywhere. She should have expected he'd find out, but the speed of it surprised her. 3 weeks, and he already knew. "Ethan Cole was hired based on his qualifications," she said carefully. "MIT engineering degree, 4 patents, 15 years of experience, and a 3-year gap that your own HR department flagged as concerning." Grant pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "I've been doing some digging. Want to know what I found?" "I already know what happened." "Do you?" Grant's eyebrows rose. "You know about the accident? The dead wife and daughter? The mental breakdown that followed?" "It wasn't a breakdown. He took time off to care for his surviving child." Potato. Grant waved dismissively. "The point is, you've hired an unstable element based on personal sympathy rather than sound business judgment. The board won't like it. The board doesn't make hiring decisions. I do. The board protects shareholder interests. And right now you're putting those interests at risk by bringing in someone who's been out of the game for 3 years. Someone who refuses to work standard hours. Someone who, let's be honest, is here because you felt guilty about rejecting his application." Charlotte stood, planting her hands on the table. "Ethan Cole has already identified and fixed a bug that 3 senior engineers couldn't find. His work in the cybersecurity division has improved our vulnerability metrics by 40%. And as for his hours, he accomplishes more in 6 than most people do in 12. "Impressive." Grant's smile didn't waver. "But can he perform when it matters? When the pressure's on? When there's no one to hold his hand? When the stakes are actually high?" "He designed security systems for the Department of Defense. I think he can handle corporate pressure." "We'll see." Grant stood, smoothing his jacket. "I've arranged a presentation for next week, full board meeting. I want Cole to present the cybersecurity roadmap. Not you, not Marcus, but him, alone. In front of everyone who doubts whether you made the right call." Charlotte felt the trap closing. "That's not fair. He's been here 3 weeks. Fair doesn't exist in business, Charlotte. You know that." Grant headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "If he succeeds, I'll back off. You'll have my support for whatever hiring initiatives you want to pursue. But if he fails, his smile sharpened. We'll be having a very different conversation about your leadership. He left, and Charlotte sank back into her chair, feeling the weight of what she'd just set in motion. She should have protected Ethan from this. Should have given him time to settle in, to prove himself gradually, to build the kind of track record that couldn't be questioned. Instead, she'd painted a target on his back, and now Grant was going to take his shot. She had to warn him. Charlotte found Ethan in his office, surrounded by screens filled with code and diagrams. He looked up when she knocked, and something in her expression must have shown, because his focus sharpened immediately. "What's wrong?" She closed the door behind her. "Grant Blackwood was just here. He knows about your hiring, and he's not happy." Ethan's expression didn't change. "I figured that was coming." He set up a board presentation for next week. He wants you to present the cybersecurity roadmap, alone in front of everyone. It's a test, Ethan. He's trying to make you fail. And if I do fail, then he'll use it against both of us. Against you, to prove you don't belong here. Against me, to prove my judgment can't be trusted. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he said, "What do you need me to do?" Charlotte blinked. She'd expected fear or anger, or at least a hint of the anxiety that was churning in her own stomach. Instead, Ethan looked calm, focused, like this was just another problem to solve. "I need you to be prepared," she said, "more prepared than you've ever been. Grant will be looking for weaknesses, any mistake, any hesitation, anything he can use." "I understand." "Do you?" Charlotte stepped closer, lowering her voice. "This isn't just about the roadmap. It's about everything. Your history, your hiring, the special accommodations. Grant will try to make you look like a liability. You need to be so good that no one can question why you're here." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Charlotte, can I tell you something?" "Of course." 3 years ago, I watched my wife and daughter die in front of me. I held my son in a hospital room and promised him that everything would be okay, even though I didn't know if that was true. I spent 3 years rebuilding our lives from nothing. No help, no support, nothing but the determination to keep my family together. He paused. "Grant Blackwood is a bully with a spreadsheet. He doesn't scare me." Charlotte felt something shift in her chest. Respect, maybe, or something deeper. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face. "Most CEOs would have thrown me to the wolves by now. You're warning me instead. I brought you into this. It's my responsibility to make sure you have a fair shot." "Is that why you're doing this? Responsibility?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Charlotte thought about the coffee shop, about the crumpled $10 bill, about the way Ethan had looked at her like she was just a person who needed help. "Maybe at first," she admitted. "Now, I don't know. I think I just want to see what happens when someone like you gets a real chance." "Someone like me?" "Someone who's been underestimated. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything and keep going anyway." Charlotte paused. "Someone who reminds me why I built this company in the first place." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than Charlotte had intended. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll be ready. For the presentation, for Grant, for whatever comes next." "I know you will." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Charlotte?" She looked back. "Yes?" "Thank you for believing in me when you didn't have to." "That's the thing, Ethan." She smiled slightly. "I'm starting to think I didn't have a choice." The week before the presentation passed in a blur of preparation. Ethan spent every free moment refining his approach, gathering data, building the kind of presentation that couldn't be questioned or dismissed. Marcus helped, contributing technical details and industry benchmarks, while Charlotte stayed deliberately distant, close enough to support, far enough to avoid accusations of favoritism. Noah noticed the change in his father immediately. "You're thinking about work again," he said on Wednesday night, poking at his dinner without eating. "You're doing the thing where you're here but not here." Ethan set down his fork. "I'm sorry, buddy. There's a big presentation next week, and is it about the mean man?" Ethan blinked. "What mean man?" "The one you told me about, the one who's trying to make things hard for you." Ethan didn't remember telling Noah about Grant specifically, but kids were perceptive. They picked up on things without being told. Yeah, he admitted. It's about him. Are you scared? The question caught Ethan off guard. He thought about it seriously, giving Noah the honesty he deserved. A little, he said finally. Not about the presentation. I know I can do that. But I'm scared of what happens if it doesn't go well. I'm scared of disappointing the people who believed in me. Noah nodded slowly, like this made sense to him. Mom used to say that being scared meant you cared about something. She said the bravest people weren't the ones who weren't scared. They were the ones who were scared and did the thing anyway. Ethan's throat tightened. When did she tell you that? Before my first day of school. After Emma. Noah paused, and Ethan saw the effort it took for him to say his sister's name. After Emma and Mom went away, I was scared to do anything, but then I remembered what Mom said, and I did the things anyway, even when they were hard. Ethan reached across the table and took his son's hand. You're the bravest person I know, Noah. Then you can be brave too. Noah squeezed his hand. And when the mean man tries to make things hard, you can just remember that I believe in you. And that lady who gave you the job believes in you, and Mom believes in you too, even if she's not here to say it. Ethan couldn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was rough. How did you get so wise? I read a lot of books about dragons. Noah grinned. Dragons are very wise. They finished dinner together, and that night, for the first time in weeks, Ethan slept through until morning. The board meeting was held in the same conference room where Charlotte had first offered Ethan the job. He arrived early, setting up his presentation with methodical precision while the morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Charlotte had told him the room would be full, 12 board members plus Grant, plus various executives who'd been invited to observe, and he wanted to know the space before it was filled with people waiting for him to fail. The room felt different when it was empty. Smaller, somehow. Less intimidating. By 9 o'clock, the chairs were filled. Grant Blackwood sat at the head of the table, his expression pleasantly neutral in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Charlotte sat 3 seats down, close enough to observe but far enough to maintain the appearance of objectivity. Marcus was near the back, his arms crossed, his face carefully blank. Good morning, Grant said, and the room fell silent. We're here to review the cybersecurity roadmap for the next fiscal year. I've asked Ethan Cole to present. His eyes found Ethan, and something in them sharpened. Given his unique perspective as our newest senior systems architect. The emphasis on newest wasn't subtle. Neither was the way Grant looked at the board members, making sure they understood the subtext. Ethan stood, moving to the front of the room with the same calm he'd felt all week. He thought about Noah's words, being scared and doing the thing anyway, and felt something settle inside him. Good morning, he said. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge something that everyone in this room is probably thinking. I'm new here, 3 weeks on the job, hired under unusual circumstances, given responsibilities that would normally require years of tenure to earn. He paused, letting the words land. I'm not going to pretend that's normal. It isn't. What I'm going to do is show you why it was the right decision. The presentation began. Ethan had built his approach around a simple principle. Don't just tell them what to do, show them what they're missing. He started with the vulnerabilities he'd identified in TechVision's current systems, walking through each weakness with the kind of detail that made executives uncomfortable. Then he moved to the fixes he'd already implemented. The authentication bug, the server timing issue, half a dozen smaller improvements that had flown under the radar. In 3 weeks, he said, we've reduced our vulnerability index by 43%, not through major overhauls or expensive consultants, through attention to detail and systematic analysis. Grant shifted in his seat. Impressive numbers, but anyone can cherry-pick statistics to make themselves look good. You're right. Ethan didn't miss a beat, which is why I brought the raw data. He clicked to the next slide, a dense spreadsheet of before and after metrics, time-stamped and verified. Every improvement, documented, every fix cross-referenced. If anyone wants to verify these numbers independently, I welcome the scrutiny. A murmur ran through the room. Charlotte kept her expression neutral, but Ethan caught the slight quirk at the corner of her mouth. Grant's eyes narrowed. Let's talk about the future roadmap then. What's your long-term vision? My vision is simple: security that doesn't require sacrifice. Ethan clicked to the next slide, a timeline stretching 18 months into the future. Most cybersecurity approaches treat protection as a trade-off. More security means more friction, more complexity, more burden on the user. I believe that's a failure of imagination. He walked through the plan methodically, explaining each phase in terms that the board could understand without being condescending. He covered technical details without getting lost in jargon, business implications without losing sight of the human element. And then he addressed the elephant in the room. I know there are concerns about my hiring, Ethan said, his voice steady. Concerns about my 3-year employment gap, about the circumstances that led to it, about whether someone with my background can be trusted in a role like this. Grant leaned forward. Go on. 3 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter in a car accident. My son survived. I made a choice. I could keep climbing the corporate ladder, or I could be the father he needed. Ethan paused. I chose my son. I would make the same choice again. The room was silent. What I learned in those 3 years wasn't on any resume. I learned how to solve problems with limited resources. I learned how to stay calm under pressure that would break most people. I learned that the things worth protecting, really worth protecting, require sacrifice. Ethan looked directly at Grant. TechVision's security isn't just about firewalls and encryption. It's about protecting the people who depend on this company, the employees, the clients, the families who rely on steady paychecks and stable systems. That's what I bring to this role, the understanding that security is personal. Grant's expression was unreadable. The board members were looking at each other, recalibrating their assumptions. That's quite a speech, Grant said finally, but speeches don't protect systems. What happens when there's a real crisis, when the pressure is on and there's no time for inspirational monologues? I'm glad you asked. Ethan clicked to his final slide, a case study he'd been saving for exactly this moment. 2 weeks ago, I identified a potential intrusion attempt in our network. Someone was probing our defenses, looking for weaknesses, exactly the kind of attack that our current systems weren't designed to detect. Charlotte sat up straighter. This was news to her. I tracked the intrusion to its source, implemented countermeasures, and shut it down before any damage was done. The whole process took 4 hours. Ethan paused. I didn't report it through official channels because I wanted to have a complete analysis ready first. But the documentation is here, verified by Marcus Webb and our security team. He clicked through the evidence, logs, traces, analysis, remediation steps. This is what I do, Ethan said quietly. Not speeches, not presentations. This. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more certain. Grant Blackwood looked at the screen, then at Charlotte, then at Ethan. His expression had changed, the sharp confidence replaced by something harder to read. Well, Grant said finally, I suppose that answers some of my questions. I hope so. Ethan gathered his materials, his hands steady. I'm happy to answer any others. Grant stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. I think we've seen enough for today. Charlotte, perhaps we can discuss next steps privately. It wasn't approval, not exactly, but it wasn't the attack Charlotte had been expecting either. Grant had come into this room expecting to destroy Ethan Cole, and instead he'd been outmaneuvered by a security guard who knew more about both systems and people than anyone had given him credit for. Charlotte allowed herself a small smile. Of course, Grant. I'll have Karen set something up. As the board members filed out, Marcus caught Ethan's eye across the room. He didn't say anything, just nodded, once, with something that looked like respect. Ethan nodded back. The battle wasn't over. Grant Blackwood wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and there would be other challenges, other tests, other moments when everything hung in the balance. But today, Ethan Cole had proven something that no spreadsheet or resume could capture. That sometimes the people who've lost the most are the ones who understand best what's worth protecting. Charlotte found him in the hallway afterward, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. That was impressive, she said, coming to stand beside him. The intrusion you stopped. Why didn't you tell me? Because you had enough to worry about, and because I wanted to prove myself without special treatment. You realize that by not telling me, you were giving Grant ammunition. If he'd found out about the intrusion before you revealed it, he would have accused me of hiding problems. I know. Ethan turned to look at her. But I also knew that the best defense against accusations is evidence. I had the evidence. I just needed the right moment to use it. Charlotte studied his face, searching for something she couldn't quite name. You planned this. I prepared for this. There's a difference. Now, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. Preparation is just planning with better documentation. Remind me never to underestimate you. I'm a security expert. Being underestimated is part of the job description. Charlotte laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her by his unexpected humor. I should get back. Grant's going to want to talk damage control, and I need to figure out how to keep him from making your life difficult. Charlotte, Ethan's voice stopped her. You don't need to protect me. I can handle Grant Blackwood. I know you can. That's not why I'm doing it. Then why? It was the same question he'd asked in her office, and Charlotte still didn't have a complete answer. But standing there in the hallway, watching the afternoon light paint patterns on the floor, she came closer to understanding. Because this company needs to change, she said quietly. And change doesn't happen if the people trying to make it happen get destroyed by the people fighting to keep things the same. You represent something, Ethan, whether you meant to or not. You're proof that our system was broken and that it can be fixed. If Grant takes you down, he's not just destroying one person, he's destroying the possibility of something better. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. That's a lot of pressure to put on a security guard. You're not a security guard anymore. No. He looked down at his hands, the scarred knuckles, the calloused palms, the evidence of all the work he'd done to rebuild his life. No, I suppose I'm not. They stood there together, two people carrying more than anyone could see, finding something unexpected in the space between what they'd been and what they were becoming. I should go, Charlotte said finally. Noah's probably wondering where you are. Ethan checked his watch. Almost 3 o'clock. Pickup time. Yeah, I should... Wait, he frowned. How do you know about pickup time? Charlotte smiled slightly. I pay attention. It's part of my job description. She walked away before he could respond, leaving Ethan alone with the skyline and the weight of everything that had just changed. He thought about the boardroom, about Grant's sharp eyes and Charlotte's careful support. He thought about the intrusion he'd stopped, the vulnerabilities he'd found, the months of work stretching out ahead of him. But mostly, he thought about Noah, waiting at school, probably reading his dragon book, trusting that his father would be there when he needed him. Ethan grabbed his bag and headed for the elevator. Some things were more important than corporate politics. The pickup line at Noah's school was the same as always, a parade of parents and nannies and occasional grandparents, all waiting for the flood of children that would pour through the doors at 3:15. Ethan found his usual spot near the old oak tree and leaned against it, letting the normalcy wash over him. 2 hours ago, he'd been standing in front of a board of directors, fighting for his place in a company that had once rejected him. Now he was just a dad, waiting for his kid, worrying about whether Noah had eaten his lunch and if he'd remembered to turn in his homework. The doors opened. Children spilled out in a wave of backpacks and chatter, and Ethan scanned the crowd for the familiar dark hair. Dad! Noah broke from the group and ran toward him, his backpack bouncing with each step. Ethan crouched down and caught him in a hug, breathing in the scent of pencil shavings and playground dust. Hey, buddy, how was school? Good. Mrs. Patterson said my book report was excellent. She used that word specifically. Excellent. Noah pulled back, grinning. How was your presentation? Ethan blinked. How do you know about my presentation? Dad, I'm 9, not stupid. You've been preparing all week. Noah's expression turned serious. Did the mean man try to make things hard? He tried. Did you win? Ethan thought about Grant's face at the end of the presentation, the calculations happening behind those sharp eyes, the acknowledgement that this particular battle had been lost. Yeah, he said. I think I did. Noah's grin widened. I knew you would. Dragons always win. I thought dragons were wise, not winners. They're both. That's what makes them dragons. Noah grabbed his hand and started pulling him toward the car. Can we have pizza to celebrate? We can have whatever you want. They walked together through the afternoon sunshine, father and son, two people who had lost everything and found a way to keep going anyway. Behind them, Manhattan glittered in the distance, 47 floors of glass and ambition, where a woman was fighting to change a system and a man had just proven that second chances were worth giving. The battle wasn't over. But for now, for this moment, it was enough. The weeks after the board presentation settled into something Ethan hadn't experienced in years, a rhythm that felt sustainable. He arrived at Tech Vision each morning at 7, spent 6 focused hours solving problems that mattered, and left at 3 to pick up Noah from school. The commute became a transition zone, 45 minutes on the subway where he could let go of server architectures and vulnerability assessments and remember that he was also a father, a person, someone who existed outside the glass towers of corporate Manhattan. Noah noticed the difference immediately. "You're not as tired anymore," he observed one evening, watching Ethan cook dinner instead of ordering takeout. "You used to come home from the security job and just sit there. Now you actually do stuff." "The new job is different," Ethan said, stirring the pasta sauce. "It uses my brain more, but it doesn't drain me the same way." "Because you like it?" "Because it matters." Ethan turned to look at his son. "When you do something that matters, it gives you energy instead of taking it away." Noah considered this with the seriousness of a 9-year-old philosopher. "Like when I finish a really hard level in my game, and I feel tired, but also good?" "Exactly like that." "Cool." Noah returned to his homework, satisfied with the explanation. "Can we have garlic bread too?" They ate dinner together at the small kitchen table, the same way they'd eaten dinner every night since Sarah and Emma died. But something had shifted in the quality of those meals. Less survival, more living. Ethan found himself actually tasting the food, actually hearing Noah's stories about school, actually present in a way he hadn't been for years. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But it had stopped being the only thing. At Tech Vision, Ethan's reputation continued to grow in ways he hadn't anticipated. The authentication bug fix had been just the beginning. Over the following weeks, he identified 17 additional vulnerabilities in the company's systems, some minor, some significant, all documented with the meticulous precision that had made him valuable to the Department of Defense. Marcus Webb stopped being skeptical and started being curious, showing up at Ethan's office with questions that went beyond the technical. "How do you see things that other people miss?" Marcus asked one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe in what had become his habitual position. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and you're finding problems I didn't even know existed." Ethan swiveled his chair to face him. "You've been doing this for 15 years inside the system. I spent 3 years outside it. Sometimes distance gives you perspective." "That's very zen. That's very practical." Ethan pulled up a diagram on his screen. "When you're inside a system, you see what you expect to see. You follow the paths that have always worked, check the boxes that have always been checked. But systems evolve. Threats evolve. The patterns that protected you 5 years ago might be the vulnerabilities that expose you today." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing. "Is that what happened with the intrusion you stopped? The one you revealed at the board meeting?" "Partially. The attacker was using a technique that wasn't in any of our threat databases, because it was new, developed specifically to exploit the kind of complacency that comes from trusting established protocols." Ethan shrugged. "I noticed it because I wasn't trusting anything. I was looking at our systems the way an outsider would look at them. The way you looked at them when you were a security guard." "Exactly." Marcus pushed off from the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when Charlotte first told me she was hiring you, I thought she'd lost her mind. A 3-year gap, no recent experience, special accommodations for family stuff. It sounded like a disaster waiting to happen. And now? Now I think she might be smarter than all of us." Marcus headed for the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. This place needed someone who sees things differently." He left before Ethan could respond, which was probably for the best. Ethan wasn't sure what he would have said anyway. Charlotte noticed the change in team dynamics during her weekly walkthrough of the engineering floor. She made these visits deliberately casual, stopping by desks, asking questions, listening more than talking. It was how she'd built Tech Vision in the first place, back when the company was 12 people in a converted warehouse and every problem was personal. Somewhere along the way, as the headcount grew and the stakes multiplied, she'd lost that connection. Now she was trying to rebuild it, one conversation at a time. The conversations about Ethan were different from the ones she'd had 3 months ago. He taught me this thing about lateral thinking, a junior engineer named Priya told her, barely looking up from her screen. When you're stuck on a problem, you don't push harder. You step back and ask what assumptions you're making. It sounds obvious, but nobody ever explained it that way before. He stays late sometimes, another engineer mentioned, which made Charlotte's eyebrows rise. Not for work stuff, for us. Last week he spent 2 hours helping Derek debug a project that wasn't even in his department, just because Derek asked. Derek himself was the most transformed. The bitter, resentful engineer who'd muttered about special treatment had become one of Ethan's most vocal defenders. "He's real," Derek said when Charlotte asked about the change. "Most people here are playing a role, trying to look smart, trying to climb the ladder, trying to be what they think management wants. Ethan just is who he is. He doesn't pretend to know things he doesn't know, doesn't pretend to be someone he's not. It's refreshing." Charlotte stored these observations away, building a picture of impact that went beyond the metrics in her reports. Ethan Cole wasn't just improving Tech Vision's security, he was improving Tech Vision's culture. And he was doing it without trying, simply by being the person he'd always been. That, she thought, was the rarest kind of leadership. The first real test of Ethan's new life came on a Thursday afternoon in late October. He was in the middle of a security audit when his phone buzzed with a text from Noah's school. "Noah is in the nurse's office. Please call immediately." The world narrowed to a single point of focus. Ethan was out of his chair and moving before the phone was back in his pocket, his mind racing through possibilities. Injury, illness, something worse. He called while waiting for the elevator. The school secretary's voice was calm but careful. "Mr. Cole, Noah had a panic attack during class. He's stable now, but he's asking for you." What triggered it? "We're not entirely sure. The class was discussing family trees for a social studies project. Noah became very upset and had to be removed from the classroom." Family trees, Sarah, Emma, the family that used to be 4 and was now 2. "I'm on my way." Ethan was halfway to the elevator when he realized the problem. The security audit was scheduled to be completed today. Marcus was counting on it for a presentation tomorrow. If Ethan left now, the whole timeline would collapse. For 3 years, this choice would have been automatic. Noah first. Always Noah first. But now there was Charlotte, who had believed in him. There was Marcus, who was depending on him. There was a company full of people who had stopped seeing him as a charity case and started seeing him as someone they could count on. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped inside. And then, before the doors could close, Charlotte appeared. "Ethan." She was slightly out of breath, like she'd been hurrying. "Karen told me you got a call from Noah's school. Is everything okay?" "He had a panic attack. I need to go." "Of course you do." Charlotte stepped into the elevator with him, pressing the button for the lobby. "The audit can wait." "Marcus is counting on it. Marcus can adjust. That's what timelines are for." Charlotte's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Your son needs you. That's not negotiable." Ethan stared at her. In all his years of corporate work, he'd never had a boss who would say something like that, who would mean it. "Charlotte, don't thank me. Just go." The elevator reached the lobby, and the doors opened. "And Ethan, call me later. Let me know he's okay." She stepped out and walked toward the security desk, already pulling out her phone to deal with whatever needed dealing with. Ethan watched her go, feeling something shift in his chest that he couldn't quite name. Then he ran. Noah was sitting on the nurse's cot, his knees pulled up to his chest, his face blotchy from crying. When he saw Ethan in the doorway, his composure crumbled completely. "Dad?" Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered his son into his arms. Noah clung to him like he was drowning, his whole body shaking with the effort of holding back more tears. "I'm here," Ethan murmured. "I'm here, buddy. It's okay." "I couldn't do it." Noah's voice was muffled against Ethan's shirt. Mrs. Patterson wanted us to make family trees, and I started drawing, and then I had to put Mom and Emma in the part that said deceased, and I couldn't breathe. I know. Ethan stroked his son's hair, feeling the familiar weight of grief press down on both of them. It's hard. It's so hard. Everyone was looking at me. They all know about Mom and Emma, but they never talk about it, and today I had to write it down and make it real, and I couldn't. You don't have to explain. Ethan pulled back just enough to look at Noah's face. There's nothing wrong with you, Noah. Nothing. What happened was hard, and it's okay to not be okay sometimes. But I'm supposed to be better now. Noah's voice cracked. The therapist said I was doing better. You said I was doing better. And then one stupid project and I fell apart like it just happened. Healing isn't a straight line. Ethan cupped his son's face in his hands, wiping away tears with his thumbs. You don't get better and stay better forever. You get better, and then something reminds you of what you lost, and you have to feel it all over again. That's not failure. That's being human. Noah was quiet for a long moment, his breathing slowly steadying. Finally, he asked, Did you leave work? Of course I did. But you had important stuff to do. Nothing is more important than you. Ethan said it simply, without hesitation, because it was simply true. Nothing ever will be. Noah searched his father's face, looking for something, certainty maybe, or proof that the words were real. Whatever he found must have satisfied him, because some of the tension left his shoulders. Can we go home? Yeah, buddy, we can go home. They signed out at the front office and walked to the car together, Noah's hand tucked firmly in Ethan's. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and the world continued spinning around them, indifferent to the small tragedy that had just unfolded in a nurse's office. In the car, Noah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Dad, the lady who gave you the job, is she nice? Ethan thought about Charlotte in the elevator, her immediate understanding, her complete lack of hesitation. Yeah, she's nice. Does she know about Mom and Emma? She knows. Is that why she's nice to you? It was a complicated question with an uncertain answer. Ethan considered it carefully before responding. I think she's nice because that's who she is, but I think knowing about our family helped her understand why certain things matter to me. He glanced at Noah in the rearview mirror. Why do you ask? Because you talk about her sometimes. Not a lot, but sometimes. And you get this look on your face like... Noah trailed off, searching for words. Like when you used to talk about work before, back when you did the important engineering stuff. I'm doing important engineering stuff again. I know, but it's different this time. You seem happier. Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He was saved from having to respond by Noah's next question. Okay, can I meet her sometime? The nice lady? Her name is Charlotte, and maybe, if the opportunity comes up. Okay. Noah settled back in his seat, apparently satisfied. I think I'd like to meet her. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the weight of the panic attack gradually lifting as the familiar streets of Brooklyn came into view. By the time they reached their apartment, Noah was almost himself again, still subdued, still tender, but no longer fragile. That night, after Noah was in bed, Ethan sat on the fire escape and called Charlotte. How is he? She asked immediately. Better. It was a rough afternoon, but he's sleeping now. What happened? Ethan told her. About the family tree project, about the word deceased, about the way grief could ambush you even when you thought you'd made peace with it. Charlotte listened without interrupting, and when he finished, there was a long pause. I'm sorry, she said finally. That must have been terrifying. It was. It is. Ethan rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion of the day settling into his bones. 3 years, and sometimes it feels like no time has passed at all. That's how grief works, isn't it? It doesn't follow a schedule. No, it doesn't. Another pause, and then Charlotte said something that surprised him. Can I tell you something about why I really offered you this job? I thought you already told me. You felt guilty about the rejection. That was part of it, but it wasn't everything. Charlotte's voice was careful, like she was choosing her words with unusual precision. When I saw your file, the 3-year gap, the explanation you refused to give, I recognized something. I saw someone who had made a choice that most people wouldn't understand. Someone who had sacrificed their career for something that mattered more. A lot of people would call that a mistake. A lot of people would be wrong. Charlotte paused. Ethan, I've spent 10 years building this company. I've sacrificed relationships, experiences, entire portions of my life for quarterly projections and market share. And somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started. I forgot that the point of success is to enable the life you want, not to become the life itself. Ethan was quiet, sensing that she needed to say this, that the words had been building for longer than just tonight. When I read your file, Charlotte continued, I saw someone who understood that. Someone who had looked at all the expectations and pressures and demands of a successful career and said, no, this matters more. And I thought maybe I needed someone like that around, to remind me what I'd forgotten. That's a lot of weight to put on a security guard. You're not a security guard anymore. Her voice softened. And you're already reminding me. Every time you leave at 3 o'clock, every time you prioritize Noah's therapy over a meeting, every time you refuse to apologize for having a life outside this building, you're showing everyone here that there's another way to do this. Ethan looked out at the Brooklyn skyline, at the lights of a million lives being lived in a million different ways. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. Charlotte paused. And Ethan, if Noah needs more time tomorrow, take it. The audit can wait. Charlotte, that's an order. He could hear the smile in her voice. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Charlotte. He hung up and sat there for a long time, watching the stars emerge from behind the city's light pollution, thinking about grief and healing and the unexpected ways that life could change direction. Noah was better the next morning. Not perfect, but functional. They ate breakfast together, talked about the dragon book he was reading, discussed whether they should order Thai food for dinner or try cooking something new. I can go to school, Noah said as Ethan was washing the dishes. You don't have to stay home with me. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm still sad, but I'm always a little sad, you know? That doesn't mean I can't do stuff. Ethan turned to look at his son, seeing the quiet courage that had gotten them both through the worst years of their lives. When did you get so brave? I learned it from you, Noah said simply. Are you going to finish your audit thing today? Probably. Marcus is waiting for it. Then you should go. I'll be okay. Noah paused, then added, and if I'm not okay, I'll call you. I promise. Ethan knelt down to Noah's level. Deal. But if you need me, I'll come, no matter what. I know, Dad. Noah hugged him quickly, the kind of hug that said everything without words. I always know. Ethan returned to TechVision that morning with a new clarity about what he was doing there and why it mattered. The audit took 3 more hours to complete, longer than it should have, because he kept stopping to think about Charlotte's words from the night before. Someone who had made a choice that most people wouldn't understand. Someone who had sacrificed their career for something that mattered more. He'd never thought of his 3-year absence that way. To him, it had always been a failure. A necessary one, maybe. But still a failure. A departure from the path he was supposed to follow. A deviation from the success he was supposed to achieve. But Charlotte saw it differently. She saw it as a choice. A deliberate one. A statement of values that most people wouldn't have the courage to make. Maybe she was right. Maybe the 3 years weren't a gap in his resume. They were the most important thing on it. Marcus found him in his office that afternoon, the completed audit report sitting on his desk. I heard about yesterday, Marcus said, closing the door behind him. Is Noah okay? He's better. It was a tough day. I'm glad he's better. Marcus sat down in the chair across from Ethan's desk. Listen, I want to apologize. For what? For the pressure, the audit deadline, the presentation, all of it. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. When Charlotte hired you, she made it clear that your family would come first. I said I understood, but when push came to shove, my first instinct was to worry about the timeline. That's not okay. Ethan shook his head. You didn't do anything wrong. The deadline was real. The work needed to get done. The work always needs to get done. That's the trap. Marcus leaned forward. I've been here for 8 years. I've missed birthdays, anniversaries, my kids' first steps, all because the work needed to get done. And you know what? The work would have gotten done anyway. It always does. The only thing I actually sacrificed was time I'll never get back. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did. Marcus met his eyes. You've got something special, Ethan. Not just the technical skills. Lots of people have those. You've got perspective. You know what matters and what doesn't. Don't let this place take that away from you. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Charlotte said something similar last night on the phone. Did she? Marcus smiled slightly. She's smarter than she lets on, our CEO. I'm starting to realize that. Marcus stood, heading for the door. The audit looks good, by the way. Better than good. If I didn't know better, I'd think you'd been doing this for years instead of months. I have been doing this for years. I just took a break. Some break. Marcus paused at the door. Ethan? I'm glad you came back. The words stayed with Ethan long after Marcus left. I'm glad you came back. Such a simple statement, but it meant more than Marcus probably knew. For 3 years, Ethan had felt like an exile from the life he was supposed to have, cut off from his career, his colleagues, his sense of professional identity. He told himself it was worth it, that Noah was worth any sacrifice, and he'd meant it. But there had always been a part of him that wondered if he'd ever find his way back. Now, sitting in his office at Tech Vision, surrounded by the tools of a trade he'd never stopped loving, he realized that the way back wasn't a return to who he'd been. It was a transformation into someone new, someone who carried the best of both worlds, the technical excellence and the human wisdom, the ambition and the perspective. Charlotte had given him the chance to become that person. The least he could do was become someone worth believing in. The opportunity to prove himself came 2 weeks later on a gray November morning that started like any other. Ethan was reviewing firewall logs when his screen flickered, then went dark, then filled with red warning messages that made his blood run cold. Critical system breach authentication. Servers compromised, data exfiltration in progress. For a moment, everything stopped. Then Ethan's training kicked in, years of experience compressing into a single point of focused action. He pulled out his phone and called Marcus. We're under attack. Active intrusion, authentication servers compromised. I need you to get Charlotte and meet me in the Security Operations Center in 5 minutes. What kind of attack? The bad kind. Move. He hung up and started running, his mind already cataloging what he knew and what he needed to find out. The authentication servers were the keys to the kingdom. If the attackers had those, they could access almost anything. The question was how much damage they'd already done and whether it could be contained. The Security Operations Center was a windowless room on the 32nd floor, filled with screens and servers and the quiet hum of systems that never slept. By the time Ethan arrived, 3 of his team members were already there, their faces pale with the recognition of what was happening. Talk to me, Ethan said, taking his place at the central console. It started 20 minutes ago, said Priya, the junior engineer who'd told Charlotte about lateral thinking. We noticed unusual traffic patterns in the authentication logs, but by the time we flagged it, they were already inside. How far inside? Far. Priya's voice shook slightly. They have access to the executive email servers, the financial systems, the client databases. If they start downloading, they won't. Ethan's voice was calm, certain, the voice of someone who had faced worse than this and survived. Pull up the intrusion signature. Let me see what we're dealing with. Marcus arrived with Charlotte close behind, both of them looking like they'd run most of the way. Charlotte took in the screens, the faces, the atmosphere of controlled panic, and her expression hardened into something Ethan hadn't seen before, the look of a general preparing for battle. What do we know? She asked. Someone bypassed our perimeter security and gained access to the authentication infrastructure, Ethan said, his eyes on the screens. They're using a technique I've seen before. Military-grade intrusion protocols, probably adapted from state-sponsored hacking tools. This isn't a random attack. Someone targeted us specifically. Can you stop them? I can try. Ethan pulled up a series of windows, his fingers flying across the keyboard. But first I need to understand how they got in. If I close the door they used, they might have another one. We need to find all the entry points before we seal any of them. How long? I don't know, hours maybe, could be longer. Charlotte nodded once, decisive. Do what you need to do. I'll handle the board, the lawyers, the communications. You handle the attack. She left, already pulling out her phone, and Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Trust. She trusted him to handle this, to protect everything she'd built, without micromanaging or second-guessing. He turned back to his screens and got to work. The next 4 hours were the most intense of Ethan's professional life. The attackers were good, better than anyone TechVision had faced before. They had multiple entry points, backup plans, and the kind of adaptive strategy that spoke of extensive preparation. Every time Ethan closed one vulnerability, they found another. Every time he blocked one line of attack, they pivoted to something new. But Ethan was better. He worked with a focus that bordered on trance, seeing patterns that others missed, anticipating moves before they were made. His team followed his lead, executing his instructions with growing confidence as they realized that their new colleague wasn't just competent, he was exceptional. I need you to isolate the financial servers, Ethan said to Marcus, who had stayed to help. They're probing the transaction logs, which means they're looking for something specific. If we cut their access now, we might be able to figure out what. Won't that alert them that we're onto them? They already know. The question is whether they've found what they're looking for. Ethan paused, a new thought crystallizing. Pull up the board meeting calendar. When's the next major financial disclosure? Marcus typed rapidly. 3 weeks. Why? Because this isn't a data theft. It's corporate espionage. Ethan's voice was grim. Someone wants our quarterly numbers before they're public. They're looking for an edge, probably for trading. Can you prove that? Give me another hour. It took 90 minutes, but Ethan found what he was looking for. A digital trail leading back to a server in the Cayman Islands, which connected to a shell company, which connected to a name that made Marcus's face go pale. That's Grant Blackwood's investment firm. Ethan nodded slowly. The attack isn't coming from outside. It's coming from inside our own shareholder base. But that's securities fraud, market manipulation. He could go to prison. He could, if we can prove it. Ethan saved the evidence to an encrypted drive, then began the process of closing the remaining vulnerabilities. Get Charlotte. She needs to see this. When Charlotte saw the evidence, her face went through several stages: shock, anger, betrayal, and finally a cold, hard calculation that Ethan recognized as the expression of someone who knew exactly what to do with a weapon. You're certain? She asked. As certain as I can be without a subpoena. The digital footprint leads directly to his firm. Either he's behind this, or someone is trying very hard to make it look like he is. It's him. Charlotte's voice was flat, certain. He's been trying to undermine me for months. This is just the first time he's gotten caught. She looked at Ethan. Can we shut them out completely? Make sure they can't try again? Already done. I've closed every vulnerability they used and added new monitoring protocols. If they try again, we'll see them coming. Good. Charlotte straightened her shoulders, and Ethan saw the transformation happen. From vulnerable target to powerful executive. From victim to victor. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Grant Blackwood's reign ends today. She left to make the call, and Ethan turned back to his screens, running final checks on the security patches he'd implemented. His hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline finally catching up with him, but his mind was clear. He'd done it. Against all odds, against an attacker with resources and access that should have been overwhelming, he'd protected TechVision and exposed the person responsible. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet voice reminded him that it was almost 3 o'clock. Noah. School pickup. The promise he'd made. Ethan looked at the screens, at the work still left to do, at the evidence that needed to be preserved and the systems that needed to be monitored. Then he looked at his phone, where a single text message waited. How's your day, Dad? Mine was good. See you at pickup. He stood up and grabbed his jacket. Where are you going? Marcus asked, surprised. School pickup. My son's waiting. But the attack, the investigation, Charlotte needs... The attack is contained. The evidence is preserved, and my son needs me more than any of this does. Ethan paused at the door. Call me if there's an emergency. A real emergency. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow. He left before Marcus could respond, moving through the building with the purposeful stride of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. Charlotte found him in the lobby, waiting for the elevator. "Marcus told me you're leaving," she said. "For school pickup." "I am." "The investigation can wait. Noah can't." Charlotte studied him for a long moment. This man who had just saved her company from a threat that could have destroyed everything, who was now walking away from the aftermath to pick up his 9-year-old from school. "You're remarkable," she said quietly. "You know that?" "I'm a father. That's not remarkable. That's just what fathers do." "Not all of them." Charlotte stepped closer, and something in her expression shifted. "My father never once chose me over work. Not once. I grew up thinking that was normal, that work always came first, that people who prioritized family were weak or unambitious or somehow less. And now? Now I'm starting to think I had it backwards." She smiled, and it was different from her usual professional expression, warmer, more vulnerable. "Go pick up your son, Ethan. We'll handle things here." "Thank you, Charlotte." "Don't thank me. Just—" She hesitated, like she was about to say something and then thought better of it. "Just give Noah a hug from someone who wishes she'd had a father like you." She turned and walked toward the elevators, leaving Ethan standing in the lobby with something new blooming in his chest, something that felt like the beginning of something he wasn't ready to name. Noah was waiting at the school gates, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face lighting up when he saw Ethan approaching. "Dad, you came." "I always come." Ethan pulled his son into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of playground dust and pencil shavings. "How was school?" "Good. Mrs. Patterson said my math test was excellent again. That's twice in 1 month." Noah pulled back, grinning. "How was your day? Did you do cool security stuff?" Ethan thought about the attack, the investigation, the evidence that would probably end Grant Blackwood's career. He thought about Charlotte's face when she saw the proof, about Marcus's shock, about the team that had followed his lead into battle. "Yeah," he said. "I did cool security stuff." "Did you save the day?" Ethan smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Something like that." They walked to the car together, Noah chattering about his math test and his friends and the dragon book he was almost finished reading. Behind them, the towers of Manhattan glittered in the afternoon sun, full of people chasing success and ambition and all the things the world said mattered. But Ethan had already found what mattered. He was holding its hand. The emergency board meeting that ended Grant Blackwood's influence at Tech Vision happened 3 days after the cyber attack, in the same conference room where Ethan had once fought for his place. Charlotte had spent those 3 days building a case that couldn't be dismissed or deflected. She worked with lawyers, forensic accountants, and federal investigators who had become very interested in the digital trail Ethan had uncovered. By the time the board members took their seats on that Thursday morning, she had everything she needed to end the threat that had been circling her company for years. Ethan wasn't present for the meeting itself. Charlotte had insisted he stay away, both to protect him from any retaliation and to ensure the focus remained on the evidence rather than the man who'd found it. But Marcus gave him a full account afterward, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of someone who'd witnessed justice being served. "You should have seen his face," Marcus said, leaning against Ethan's doorframe. When Charlotte laid out the evidence, the server traces, the financial connections, the timeline showing exactly when his people accessed our systems, Grant went gray. Actually gray, like all the blood drained out of him. Did he deny it? He tried. Said it was a setup, that someone was framing him, that Charlotte was conducting a witch hunt because she couldn't handle competition. Marcus shook his head. "Nobody bought it. The evidence was too clean, too comprehensive. Your work, mostly. The board voted unanimously to remove him from his position and report everything to the SEC. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. What happens now? Federal investigation, probably. Securities fraud charges. His firm will distance themselves as fast as they can, but the damage is done. Marcus paused, his expression shifting. You know what the best part was? When Grant was leaving, he looked at Charlotte and said, "You'll regret this." And Charlotte just smiled and said, "I regret a lot of things, Grant. Protecting my company will never be one of them." Ethan smiled slightly. That sounds like her. It was magnificent. Marcus pushed off from the doorframe. Anyway, I thought you'd want to know. You saved more than our data last week. You might have saved the whole company. He left, and Ethan turned back to his screens, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about Charlotte facing down Grant Blackwood, about the courage it took to stand up to someone who had been trying to destroy her for years, about the particular strength of someone who refused to be intimidated. She reminded him of Sarah in a way. Not in appearance or manner, Sarah had been warm where Charlotte was composed, spontaneous where Charlotte was deliberate, but in the bedrock certainty of who she was and what she believed. Sarah had never wavered in her convictions, never compromised her values for convenience or comfort. Charlotte was the same. It was a dangerous thought. Ethan pushed it away and focused on his work. But the thought kept coming back. Charlotte found herself thinking about Ethan more than she should. It started small, noticing when he arrived each morning, tracking his movements through the building, finding excuses to walk past his office during her daily rounds. She told herself it was professional interest, that she was simply monitoring the performance of a key employee, that any CEO would do the same after their company had been attacked and saved by the same person. But there were moments that didn't fit that narrative. The way she felt when their eyes met across a crowded conference room. The way his voice on the phone at night had become something she looked forward to, a ritual that had grown from professional check-ins to conversations that lasted hours. The way she'd started to notice things about him that had nothing to do with his job performance. The gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the particular way he smiled when he talked about Noah. She was 41 years old, the CEO of a company worth billions, and she was developing feelings for her employee like a teenager with a crush. It was inappropriate. It was complicated. It was exactly the kind of thing she'd spent her career avoiding, and she couldn't seem to stop. The first real acknowledgement of what was happening came on a night in late November, during one of their phone calls. They'd been talking for an hour already, about the investigation into Grant, about upcoming changes to the security infrastructure, about a bug Noah had caught at school and was stubbornly refusing to let slow him down. The conversation had drifted into personal territory, as it often did now, and Charlotte found herself telling Ethan things she'd never told anyone. "My father built the first tech company I ever saw," she said, curled up on her couch with a glass of wine she'd barely touched. "He was brilliant, genuinely brilliant, and completely absent. He'd work 80-hour weeks and call it sacrifice, tell us he was doing it all for the family, but the truth was, he preferred the office to home. We were complications to be managed, not people to be loved." "Is that why you never married?" The question was gentle, without judgment, and Charlotte felt something loosen in her chest at the way he asked it. "Partly. I watched my mother spend 30 years waiting for a man who was never really there, and I swore I'd never do the same thing, so I made work my whole life instead." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Different path to the same loneliness, it turns out. "You're not lonely." "No?" "No." Ethan's voice was quiet, certain. Lonely people don't call their employees at 10 o'clock to talk about everything and nothing. Lonely people don't remember the names of their staff members' children or notice when someone needs a day off before they ask. You're surrounded by people who care about you, Charlotte. You just haven't let yourself see it. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, feeling the truth of his words settle into places that had been empty for too long. "When did you get so wise?" she asked finally. "I'm not wise. I'm just old enough to recognize the things I used to miss." Ethan paused. "And I've spent a lot of time thinking about what matters since Sarah died. You get perspective when the worst thing imaginable happens and you survive it. I can't even imagine what that was like. I hope you never have to." His voice softened. "But I'll tell you something I learned from it. Life is shorter than we think, and the things we tell ourselves we'll do someday have a way of never happening. The only time that's real is now." Charlotte set down her wine glass, her heart beating faster than it should. "What are you saying, Ethan?" A long pause. Then, "I'm saying that I think about you more than I should. I'm saying that these phone calls are the best part of my day. I'm saying that I know there are 100 reasons why this is complicated, but I'm tired of letting complications stop me from being honest about how I feel." Charlotte's breath caught. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything. I know the situation. I work for you. There are power dynamics. It's exactly the kind of thing that HR would have a field day with. But you asked me to be honest once, and I've been trying to do that ever since. So here's the honest truth. I have feelings for you, real ones, and I don't know what to do about them. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. I have feelings for you too, Charlotte said quietly. I've been trying to ignore them for weeks. Is it working? No. She laughed, and this time there was real humor in it. It's not working at all. What do we do about it? I don't know. I've never been in this situation before. Charlotte paused. But I do know that I don't want to stop talking to you. Whatever else happens, I don't want to lose these conversations. You won't. Whatever else happens, you won't lose me. They talked for another hour after that, but the tone had shifted. Something unspoken had become spoken, and there was no taking it back. When Charlotte finally hung up the phone, it was past midnight, and she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like her carefully ordered life had just been rearranged in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. She should have been worried, should have been calculating the risks, the complications, the thousand ways this could go wrong. Instead, she was smiling. The shift in their relationship was gradual, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Charlotte started finding reasons to stop by Ethan's office, questions about security protocols, updates on the investigation, casual conversations that somehow stretched longer than they should. Ethan started staying late on days when Noah was at therapy, finding reasons to be in the building when Charlotte was working through dinner. Small things accumulated. A cup of tea left on Charlotte's desk, prepared exactly the way she liked it. A note in Ethan's inbox with feedback on a proposal he'd submitted, ending with a smiley face that was completely out of character for the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Looks across conference tables that lasted a beat too long. Accidental touches in elevators that didn't feel accidental at all. The staff noticed, of course. People always noticed. But the whispers were surprisingly kind. Charlotte had been alone for so long that most people seemed happy to see her connecting with someone, and Ethan's reputation had grown to the point where he was seen as a hero rather than a charity case. Marcus was the first to say anything directly. "So," he said, dropping into the chair across from Ethan's desk with elaborate casualness. "You and Charlotte." Ethan kept his eyes on his screen. "What about me and Charlotte?" "Come on, man. I've been watching you two dance around each other for weeks. The whole building's taking bets on when you'll finally admit what everyone else can see." Ethan looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "There's nothing to admit." "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." Marcus leaned forward. "Look, I'm not trying to cause problems. I think it's great, actually. Charlotte's been running herself into the ground for years, and you're the first person I've ever seen make her slow down enough to have a life. But I need to know, are you serious about her?" "Serious? Serious? Not playing games, not caught up in the boss-employee fantasy, not using her for your career. Serious. Because if you hurt her, there are a lot of people in this building who will make your life very difficult." Ethan met Marcus's gaze directly. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. I haven't looked at another woman since. Not because I was trying to be noble, but because I didn't think I was capable of feeling that way again. And then I met Charlotte, and I realized I was wrong." "So you are serious?" "I'm terrified," Ethan corrected, which in my experience means the same thing. Marcus nodded slowly, something in his expression softening. "Good. That's what I needed to hear." He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're good for each other. Just be careful. She's been hurt before, even if she doesn't talk about it. So have I." "I know." Marcus smiled slightly. "Maybe that's why it works." The first time Noah met Charlotte was unplanned, like most of the important moments in their story. It was a Friday afternoon in early December, and Ethan's usual babysitter had canceled at the last minute due to a family emergency. Normally, this would have meant leaving work early. Noah was old enough to be alone for short periods, but Ethan didn't like to push it. But there was a critical system update scheduled that Ethan needed to oversee personally. He was pacing his office trying to figure out the logistics when Charlotte appeared in his doorway. "Karen said you looked stressed," she said. "What's going on?" Ethan explained the situation, and Charlotte's response was immediate and unexpected. Bring him here. What? Bring Noah here. He can hang out in my office while you handle the update. I've got a couch, a TV, and a drawer full of snacks that my assistant keeps stocked for late nights. He'll be fine. Charlotte, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. She smiled, and it was the warm, unguarded version that Ethan had only recently started to see. Besides, I've been wanting to meet him. This seems like as good an opportunity as any. An hour later, Noah was installed on Charlotte's office couch, his dragon book in his lap, and a bowl of pretzels within reach. He'd been shy at first, hiding behind Ethan's leg, answering Charlotte's questions in monosyllables, but Charlotte had a way with kids that surprised Ethan. She asked about his book, listened to his explanations of dragon hierarchy with apparent fascination, and didn't talk to him like he was a child who needed to be managed. Your dad talks about you a lot, Charlotte said, sitting on the couch beside him. He says you're the bravest person he knows. Noah looked up from his book, his expression skeptical. He said that? He did, multiple times. That's embarrassing. Charlotte laughed, a real laugh, the kind that Ethan rarely heard in professional settings. I think it's sweet. My father never said anything like that about me. Why not? I don't know. Maybe he didn't think to. Maybe he didn't notice. Charlotte shrugged. Some people aren't very good at saying how they feel. Noah considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. Dad's good at it. He tells me he loves me every day, even when I'm being annoying. That doesn't surprise me. Charlotte's eyes met Ethan's across the room, and something passed between them that didn't need words. Your dad is pretty good at most things. The system update took 3 hours. When Ethan finally finished and came to collect Noah, he found his son and Charlotte deep in conversation about the relative merits of different dragon species, with Charlotte arguing passionately for a breed called Spiraling Shadows that Noah insisted was overpowered and needed to be nerfed. She's wrong, Noah informed Ethan. Spiraling Shadows have a weakness to ice attacks. Everyone knows that. I didn't know that, Charlotte admitted. You'll have to teach me more next time. Noah's face lit up. Next time, can I come back? Anytime your dad needs to work late, my couch is always available. On the drive home, Noah was quiet for longer than usual. Finally, he said, Dad? I like Charlotte. Do you? Yeah, she's nice, and she listens when I talk about dragons, even though adults usually get bored. Noah paused. She looks at you different. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. Different how? Like Mom used to look at you. Like you're important. The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He was quiet for a moment, processing, before he trusted himself to speak. How do you feel about that? Noah thought about it. I think it's good. You've been sad for a long time, Dad, and when you talk about Charlotte, you don't seem as sad. He paused. Mom wouldn't want you to be sad forever. She'd want you to be happy. How do you know that? Because she loved you. And people who love you want you to be happy, even when they can't be there anymore. Noah's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was wisdom in it that made Ethan's throat tighten. Can we have pizza for dinner? Yeah, buddy, we can have pizza. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and Ethan found himself thinking about what Noah had said. Mom wouldn't want you to be sad forever. She'd want you to be happy. It was true. Sarah would have wanted him to move on, to find love again, to give Noah a complete family instead of just the two of them against the world. She'd told him as much, in those last terrible days in the hospital when they'd both known what was coming. Don't close yourself off, she'd whispered, her hand cold in his. Promise me, Ethan. When you're ready, let someone in. For Noah's sake, and for yours. He'd promised, even though he'd never believed he'd be able to keep it. Now, 3 years later, he finally understood what she'd meant. The annual Tech Vision holiday party was held in mid-December, transforming the usually sterile office building into something magical. Charlotte had always hated these events. The forced mingling, the awkward conversations, the way people tried to use the festive atmosphere to pitch projects or curry favor. But this year was different. This year, she found herself looking forward to it. She chose her dress carefully, a deep green that brought out her eyes, elegant but not showy, and spent longer on her hair and makeup than she had in years. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone she almost didn't recognize. A woman who looked happy, who looked like she had something to celebrate. The party was in full swing when Ethan arrived, Noah in tow. Charlotte had invited them both, had insisted, actually, overriding Ethan's concerns about mixing family and work. Noah was wearing a clip-on tie that was slightly crooked, and his eyes went wide when he saw the decorations. "Wow," he breathed. "It looks like a castle." "It's supposed to be a winter wonderland," Charlotte said, crouching down to his level. "But I think castle is better. Maybe we should redecorate." "Can I explore?" "Of course, just stay where your dad can see you." Noah ran off to investigate the dessert table, and Ethan turned to Charlotte with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Charlotte took in his suit, clearly new, obviously purchased for this occasion, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Noah wouldn't let me say no. He's been talking about nothing else all week." Ethan paused. "And I wanted to see you, outside of work, outside of phone calls. Just see you. And you're even more beautiful in person." Charlotte felt her cheeks flush, which was absurd. She was 41 years old, the CEO of a major company, and she was blushing like a schoolgirl. "Dance with me," she said impulsively. "What?" "Dance with me. There's music, there's a dance floor, and I haven't danced with anyone in years." She held out her hand. "Please?" Ethan took her hand and they walked together to the dance floor, aware of the eyes following them, not caring. The music was something slow and classic, a jazz standard that Charlotte vaguely recognized, and they moved together with an ease that surprised them both. "People are watching," Ethan murmured. "Let them watch." "This isn't exactly subtle." "I'm tired of subtle." Charlotte looked up at him, her heart pounding. "I'm tired of pretending this isn't happening, of hiding how I feel, of worrying about what people will think. I want this, Ethan. I want you, and I don't want to waste any more time being afraid of it." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his hand warm on her waist. Then he said, "Noah asked me today if you were my girlfriend." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know, that it was complicated." Ethan paused. "But now I'm thinking maybe it doesn't have to be." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've spent 3 years being careful, being cautious, making sure every decision was the safe one, the right one, the one that wouldn't lead to more pain." His voice dropped. "And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of letting fear run my life. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that. Noah doesn't want that. And He took a breath. "I don't want that anymore either." Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes, happy tears, overwhelmed tears, the tears of someone who had spent a lifetime building walls and was finally ready to let them fall. "So what do we do now?" "Now?" Ethan smiled, and it was the first truly unreserved smile she'd ever seen from him. "Now we stop pretending. Now we tell Noah, tell the company, tell anyone who asks. Now we start building something real." "That's terrifying." "I know, but the best things usually are." Charlotte pulled him closer, resting her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek. Around them, the party continued, music and laughter and the hum of 100 conversations, but in that moment, there was only the two of them. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's stop pretending." They left the dance floor together, hand in hand, and found Noah at the dessert table with chocolate frosting on his chin and a smile that could have lit up Manhattan. "Dad, Charlotte!" He waved them over excitedly. "There's a chocolate fountain, an actual fountain made of chocolate." Charlotte laughed and grabbed a napkin to wipe his face. "I see you found it. It's the best thing I've ever seen." Noah looked up at them, at their joined hands, at the way they were standing so close together. His smile shifted into something knowing, something wise beyond his years. "Are you guys together now? Like, together? Ethan glanced at Charlotte, who nodded slightly. "Yeah, buddy," Ethan said. "We're together. Finally!" Noah rolled his eyes with dramatic exasperation. "I've been waiting for you to figure that out for weeks." "You have?" "Dad, I'm 9, not blind. You smile every time she calls. You talk about her all the time. It was super obvious. He grabbed another strawberry and dipped it in the chocolate fountain. Can we have Christmas at her house? I bet she has a really big tree. Charlotte laughed, wiping happy tears from her eyes. We can talk about Christmas later. Right now, let's just enjoy the party. They spent the rest of the evening together, the three of them, dancing and laughing and eating too much chocolate. People noticed, of course. The whispers spread through the room like ripples in a pond. But Charlotte found that she didn't care. For the first time in years, she had something worth talking about. And for the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. The warmth of a family that wasn't just surviving, but thriving. The drive home that night was quiet. Noah asleep in the back seat, his face still slightly sticky from chocolate. Charlotte had offered them a guest room, but Ethan had gently declined. There would be time for that later, and tonight felt like enough, more than enough. Thank you, Charlotte had said at the door, her hand lingering in his. For tonight, for everything. Thank you for not giving up on me. Was that ever an option? I don't know, maybe at the beginning, before I understood what you were really offering. And what was that? Ethan had looked at her, really looked at her, seeing everything she was and everything she was becoming, and felt the last of his walls crumble away. A second chance, he said, at everything. He'd kissed her then, soft and certain, a promise of things to come. And when he finally pulled away, Charlotte was crying again. Happy tears, overwhelmed tears. The tears of someone who had just discovered that the future could be better than the past. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Charlotte. He carried Noah to the car, tucked him into his booster seat, and drove through the December night with the city lights streaming past like fallen stars. In the rearview mirror, his son slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams 9-year-olds dream about. And in his chest, for the first time in 3 years, Ethan felt something that wasn't grief or fear or careful, measured hope. He felt joy. The winter after the holiday party was the happiest Ethan had known since Sarah died. Christmas came and went in a blur of warmth and connection, celebrated at Charlotte's apartment with a tree that was indeed as big as Noah had hoped. They decorated it together, the three of them, with ornaments that Charlotte had collected over the years, and a few new ones that Ethan and Noah had chosen at a street fair in Brooklyn. The star on top was crooked, placed there by Noah standing on Ethan's shoulders, and Charlotte had insisted they leave it that way, because imperfection was what made things real. New Year's Eve found them on Charlotte's rooftop terrace, watching fireworks explode over Manhattan while Noah counted down the seconds with increasingly excited shouts. When midnight struck, Ethan kissed Charlotte while their son cheered, and for one perfect moment, everything in the world felt exactly as it should be. January brought new challenges and new victories. The federal investigation into Grant Blackwood's activities concluded with a settlement that cost him his entire stake in Tech Vision, his reputation in the financial world, and any hope of ever holding influence over Charlotte's company again. The news coverage was extensive. Tech CEO takes down predatory investor, read one headline. And Charlotte handled the interviews with the same composed confidence she brought to everything. But it was the quieter victories that meant more to Ethan. Noah's therapist reported that his anxiety levels had dropped significantly. His nightmares, once a weekly occurrence, had become rare. He was making friends at school, participating in class, living the kind of normal childhood that had seemed impossible in the dark years after the accident. He's thriving, Dr. Martinez said during their monthly check-in. Whatever changes you've made in your lives, they're working. Keep doing what you're doing. What they were doing was building a family. It wasn't official, not yet, but the pieces were falling into place. Charlotte started keeping toys in her apartment for Noah's visits. Ethan started keeping a change of clothes in her closet. They fell into routines without planning them. Sunday brunches at the diner near Charlotte's building, Wednesday dinners at Ethan's apartment, Saturday adventures to museums and parks, and anywhere else Noah wanted to explore. The staff at Tech Vision adapted to the new reality with surprising grace. Charlotte had been prepared for awkwardness, for whispers, for the inevitable complications of an office romance between CEO and senior employee. Instead, she found support. People seemed genuinely happy for them, or at least wise enough to keep any objections to themselves. Marcus summed it up best during a meeting in late January. "You're both better at your jobs since this started," he said. "More focused, more energetic, more human. I don't know what love does to brain chemistry, but whatever it is, it's working." "That's very scientific of you," Charlotte said dryly. "I'm an engineer. I work with what the data tells me." February brought Valentine's Day and Ethan's first real date with Charlotte. Just the two of them, without Noah, without work obligations, without the constant presence of other people. He'd arranged everything himself: reservations at a restaurant he couldn't quite afford, flowers delivered to her office, a card that he'd spent 3 days writing because the words needed to be perfect. The card said, "1 year ago, I was a security guard who paid for a stranger's coffee. Now I'm the luckiest man in the world. Thank you for seeing what was worth saving." Charlotte cried when she read it. Then she kissed him so thoroughly that they almost missed their reservation. At dinner, over candlelight and wine that cost more than Ethan's weekly grocery budget, Charlotte told him something she'd been thinking about for weeks. "I want to announce a new initiative," she said, "a second-door hiring program. We'd actively recruit people with non-traditional backgrounds, employment gaps, circumstances that other companies use as automatic disqualifications. It would be a real commitment, not just PR, but actual resources, actual positions, actual opportunities." "That sounds ambitious. It sounds necessary." Charlotte's eyes met his. "You changed this company, Ethan. You changed it by being here, by being yourself, by proving that the traditional metrics we use to evaluate people are incomplete at best and actively harmful at worst. I want to institutionalize that change. Make it part of who we are. And you're telling me this because I want you to help design it. You understand what people in those situations need better than anyone else at TechVision. The practical support, the flexibility, the respect." She paused. "And because I want to name it after you." Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "What?" "The Cole Initiative. That's what I want to call it." "Charlotte, I can't. That's too much." "It's not enough." Charlotte reached across the table and took his hand. "You saved my company from a cyber attack. You exposed the man who was trying to destroy everything I built. You showed me what it means to be a leader who actually cares about people. Naming a program after you is the least I can do." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing. Finally, he said, "Sarah would have liked you." "You think so?" "I know so. She was always telling me to use my skills for good, to find ways to help people who needed it. She would have loved this idea." He squeezed Charlotte's hand. "She would have loved you. I wish I could have met her." "Me too." Ethan's voice was thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. "But I think she sent you to me. That sounds crazy, I know, but the way everything happened, the declined card, the coffee, the way our paths kept crossing, it feels like more than coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidence," Charlotte said quietly. "I believe in people making choices. You chose to pay for my coffee. I chose to read your file. We both chose to be brave when it would have been easier to be careful." She paused. "Maybe Sarah's role was just making sure we were both in the right place at the right time. The rest was up to us." They finished dinner talking about the future, not in abstract terms, but in specific plans and concrete timelines. The Cole Initiative would launch in March. Ethan would be promoted to Chief Technology Officer in April. And somewhere after that, when the time was right, they would make their family official. None of it happened the way they planned. The crisis came without warning on a Tuesday morning in early March. Ethan was in his office when his phone rang, not his work phone, but the one he kept in his pocket for emergencies, the one whose number was only known to Noah's school, his therapist, and Charlotte. "Mr. Cole, this is Dr. Martinez. I need you to come to my office right away." "Is Noah okay?" "Noah is fine, but there's something we need to discuss, and I don't think it can wait." Ethan was out the door before she finished speaking, his heart pounding with the familiar terror of a parent who has learned never to take safety for granted. The drive to Dr. Martinez's office took 20 minutes that felt like hours, every red light a personal insult, every slow driver a cosmic joke. Noah was in the waiting room when Ethan arrived, looking small and confused and not quite meeting his father's eyes. "Hey, buddy." Ethan knelt down to his level. What's going on? I did something, Noah whispered. Something bad. Before Ethan could respond, Dr. Martinez opened her office door. Mr. Cole, please come in, both of you. The story came out in pieces, pulled from Noah like thorns from a wound. It had started 2 weeks ago, when a substitute teacher had asked the class to write about their families. Noah had written about his mother and sister, not in the past tense, but in the present. He'd described Emma's laugh, Sarah's cooking, the way their house smelled on Sunday mornings. He'd written about them as if they were still alive. The substitute teacher, not knowing the situation, had praised the essay, had held it up as an example of vivid writing, had made Noah read it out loud to the class. And Noah, caught between the truth and the fiction he'd created, had said nothing. For 2 weeks, he'd maintained the lie, had answered questions about his mother and sister with invented details, had created an elaborate fantasy in which the accident had never happened, in which his family was still whole, in which he was still the boy he'd been before everything fell apart. I know it was wrong, Noah said, his voice barely audible. I know I shouldn't have lied, but when Mrs. Davidson asked about my family, I couldn't say the words. I couldn't say they're dead, so I said something else. And then I had to keep saying something else, and something else. And now everyone thinks I have a mom and a sister, and I don't know how to make it stop. Ethan's heart broke in ways he hadn't known were still possible. Oh, buddy. He pulled Noah into his arms, holding him tight. It's okay. We're going to figure this out. You're not mad. I'm not mad. I'm sad, and I'm worried, and I wish you'd told me sooner, but I'm not mad. Ethan pulled back to look at his son's face. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're finally happy. Noah's eyes filled with tears. You have Charlotte now and the new job, and you smile all the time instead of just pretending. I didn't want to ruin it. I didn't want you to be sad again because of me. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. For 3 years, he'd been so focused on keeping Noah safe that he'd never considered the weight his son was carrying, the pressure of being the reason his father smiled, the fear of becoming a burden, the desperate need to protect the parent who was supposed to be protecting him. Noah, listen to me. Ethan's voice was fierce with the intensity of his love. You could never ruin anything. You are the best thing in my life. You are the reason I get up every morning, the reason I keep trying, the reason I found the strength to build a new life after losing your mom and Emma. You don't owe me your happiness. Your job isn't to make me smile. Your job is to be a kid, to struggle and grow and make mistakes and learn from them. That's all. That's everything. Noah was crying now, deep, racking sobs that shook his whole body. Ethan held him through it, rocking him gently, letting him release the grief and fear and guilt that had been building for longer than either of them had realized. Dr. Martinez watched them with professional compassion. When Noah's sobs finally subsided, she spoke quietly. This is a breakthrough, not a setback. Noah's been carrying this alone because he didn't think he could share it. The fact that it came out, even in this way, means he trusts that he'll still be loved on the other side of the truth. She paused. But he's going to need extra support over the coming weeks, and he's going to need to see you be vulnerable too, Mr. Cole. He needs to know that it's okay to not be okay, that the adults in his life struggle too, and that struggling doesn't mean failing. What do I do? Be honest with him about your own grief, your own fears, your own moments of weakness. Show him that strength isn't the absence of pain, it's the willingness to keep going despite it. Dr. Martinez smiled gently, and maybe introduce him to Charlotte in a different way, not as Dad's girlfriend, but as someone who's becoming part of the family, someone who also gets to struggle and make mistakes and be loved anyway. That night, Ethan called Charlotte and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her silence heavy with the weight of what she was hearing. When he finished, there was a long pause. I'm coming over, she said. Charlotte, you don't have to. I want to. Noah needs to see that the people who love him show up when things are hard, not just when things are easy. Her voice softened. And I need you to know that this doesn't change anything. I knew what I was getting into when I fell in love with you. I knew there would be hard days, complicated days, days when the grief came back and threatened to swallow everything. I'm not going anywhere. She arrived an hour later with takeout Chinese food and a stuffed dragon that she'd bought at a toy store on the way. I know you're too old for stuffed animals, she said, handing it to Noah. But I also know that sometimes it helps to have something to hold when things are scary. This one's name is Charlie. He's very brave, but he also gets scared sometimes, just like real dragons. Noah took the dragon with careful hands, examining it like it held secrets. Did you know about real dragons, like in my book? I know a little bit. Your dad told me you're the expert, though. Charlotte sat down on the couch beside him. Maybe you could teach me sometime? Maybe. Noah clutched Charlie to his chest. Charlotte, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think my mom would be okay with you being here, like with you and my dad being together? Charlotte's breath caught, but she didn't look away from Noah's searching eyes. I think your mom would want your dad to be happy. I think she would want you to have a full, loving family with people who care about you and show up for you and help you through the hard times. And I think, she paused, choosing her words carefully. I think she would want me to love you both the best way I know how. Not to replace her, no one could ever do that, but to add more love to your lives. To be another person in your corner. Do you love my dad? Yes, very much. Do you love me? Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes. Yes, Noah. I love you too. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I love you too, Charlotte. Is that okay? That's more than okay. Charlotte pulled him into a hug, and for the first time since the session with Dr. Martinez, Noah relaxed completely. That's everything. They ate Chinese food together on the living room floor, talking about dragons and school and nothing important. Noah fell asleep with his head in Charlotte's lap, Charlie the dragon tucked under his arm, and Ethan watched them with an expression that Charlotte couldn't quite read. What are you thinking? She asked quietly. I'm thinking about what Dr. Martinez said, about showing Noah that adults struggle too. Ethan paused. I've been so focused on being strong for him that I forgot he needs to see me be human. He needs to know that grief doesn't make you weak, that asking for help doesn't make you a burden, that love can hold all of it, the good and the bad, the joy and the pain. So show him. I'm going to. Ethan looked at Charlotte with something new in his eyes. Not just love, but a kind of fierce determination. And I'm going to show him something else too. What's that? That when you find the right person, you don't let fear stop you from building a life with them. He took a breath. Charlotte, I know this isn't the moment I planned. I was going to wait until the coal initiative launched, until everything was stable, until the timing was perfect. But I'm starting to realize that perfect timing is a myth. The only time that's real is now. Charlotte's heart began to pound. Ethan, what are you? I love you. I love the way you see the world, the way you fight for what's right, the way you showed up tonight without hesitation, because my son needed to know he was loved. I love that you let me be who I am, a father first, always, and that you never once made me feel like that was a problem. Ethan, I don't have a ring. I don't have a speech prepared. I just have the truth. He met her eyes, and she saw everything there, the grief and the healing, the fear and the courage, the love that had grown from a declined card and a crumpled $10 bill. Will you marry me? Charlotte looked at him, at Noah sleeping peacefully in her lap, at the small apartment that had become more of a home than her penthouse had ever been. She thought about all the reasons to be cautious, to wait, to make sure everything was in place before taking such a significant step. Then she thought about what Ethan had said. The only time that's real is now. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. They kissed over Noah's sleeping form, soft and certain and full of promise. And when Noah stirred and asked what was happening, Ethan told him the truth. Charlotte said, yes, buddy, we're going to be a family. Noah's sleepy face broke into a smile. Finally, I've been waiting for you to ask her for ages. You have? Dad, I'm 9, not blind. He snuggled deeper into Charlotte's lap, pulling Charlie close. Can we have pancakes for breakfast? To celebrate? We can have whatever you want, Charlotte said, her voice thick with happy tears. We can have everything. The coal initiative launched in April, exactly as planned. Charlotte made the announcement at a company-wide meeting, with Ethan beside her on the stage and Noah watching from the front row. She explained the program's goals, actively recruiting people with non-traditional backgrounds, providing flexible work arrangements for caregivers, removing arbitrary barriers that kept talented people from being seen. This company was built on the idea that technology can change the world, Charlotte said. But we forgot that technology doesn't change anything on its own. People do. And the more diverse our people are, in their backgrounds, their experiences, their perspectives, the better equipped we are to build something truly meaningful. She turned to Ethan, and her voice softened. I named this program after someone who taught me what second chances really mean. Someone who showed me that the gaps in a resume might be the most important parts of a person's story. Someone who reminded me that success isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, doing the work, and refusing to give up on the people who matter. She reached for his hand. Ethan Cole came to Tech Vision as a security guard, and he's leaving this stage as our chief technology officer. Not because I gave him a handout, but because he earned every single thing he achieved. And along the way, he changed this company, and he changed me in ways I'm still discovering. The applause was thunderous. Noah stood on his chair to cheer, and someone had to remind him that standing on chairs wasn't safe, and Charlotte laughed through her tears because everything was messy and imperfect and absolutely, completely right. The wedding happened in June, on a rooftop in Brooklyn with the Manhattan skyline as their backdrop. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, the people who had been part of their journey from the beginning. Marcus served as Ethan's best man. Charlotte's college roommate, a woman named Diana, who had been the only person to know about her father's emotional absence, stood as maid of honor. And Noah, in a suit that made him look much older than 9, carried the rings on a pillow he'd decorated himself with dragons and stars. The officiant asked Ethan to speak his vows, and he pulled out a piece of paper that was already wrinkled from being folded and unfolded too many times. Charlotte, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. 1 year ago, I was a man who had lost everything. I'd lost my wife, my daughter, my career, my sense of who I was supposed to be. I was working as a security guard because it was the only job that let me be the father Noah needed, and I had accepted that my life would be small and careful forever. He looked up from the paper, meeting her eyes. Then you walked into a Starbucks with a declined card and a look on your face that I recognized. It was the look of someone who had everything the world said they should want and still felt alone. And something in me, some instinct I thought was dead, reached out. I paid for your coffee. $5. The most important investment I ever made. A soft laugh rippled through the crowd. You gave me my career back, but that's not why I love you. You gave me a family, but that's not why I love you either. I love you because you see people, not their resumes or their circumstances or their failures, but the actual human beings underneath. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. And you showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a new one. He folded the paper and tucked it away. I promise to love you with everything I have and everything I am. I promise to be your partner, your champion, your safe place when the world is too much. I promise to remind you that you're not alone every single day for the rest of our lives. And I promise that no matter what happens, I will always choose us, you and me and Noah, over everything else. Charlotte was crying. So was half the audience. Even Noah was wiping his eyes, though he would later insist it was allergies. Ethan, Charlotte said when it was her turn, her voice thick but clear, I spent 41 years building walls. I told myself I was being strong, being independent, being the kind of person who didn't need anyone. But the truth is, I was terrified. Terrified of needing someone and having them leave. Terrified of being vulnerable and getting hurt. Terrified of loving someone so much that losing them would break me. She reached out and took his hands. Then you came along and you broke through every wall I'd built. Not by force. You're too gentle for that, but by being exactly who you are. Patient and kind and honest and brave. You showed me what it looks like to love without holding back, to commit without guarantees, to build a life based on trust instead of fear. Her voice grew stronger. I promise to be the partner you deserve. I promise to support your dreams and celebrate your victories and hold you through the hard times. I promise to love Noah like my own, to be there for him in every way a parent should be. And I promise that no matter how scary it gets, no matter how uncertain the future seems, I will never stop choosing us." The officiant pronounced them married, and Ethan kissed Charlotte while Noah cheered and the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and infinite possibility. At the reception, Noah gave a toast that no one was expecting. He stood on a chair. Someone had apparently given up on enforcing the chair-standing rule, and clinked his fork against his glass until everyone was quiet. Hi," he said, his voice small but determined. "I'm Noah. I'm 9, and I wanted to say something about my dad and Charlotte." The crowd fell silent. 3 years ago, my mom and my sister died. It was the worst thing that ever happened. My dad and I were really sad for a long time, and sometimes I thought we would be sad forever." He took a breath. "But then Charlotte came. Not to replace my mom, nobody could do that, but to add more love to our family. And that's when I learned something important." He looked at Ethan and Charlotte, his eyes bright with the particular wisdom of children who have survived loss. "Love doesn't run out. It's not like a piggy bank where you only have so much, and if you spend it all, you don't have any left. Love is more like a candle. You can use one candle to light another candle, and the first one doesn't get smaller. It just makes more light." He held up his glass of apple juice. "To my dad and Charlotte, thank you for making more light." The applause was different this time, softer, more reverent, the kind of sound people make when they've witnessed something profound. Charlotte pulled Noah into a hug that lasted long enough for him to start squirming, and Ethan wiped tears from his face without embarrassment. Later that night, after the dancing and the cake and the endless photographs, the three of them stood on the rooftop together, looking out at the city they all called home. "Dad," Noah said, "are we going to live in Charlotte's apartment now, the one with the big tree?" "We're going to find a new place," Ethan said. "Something that's ours, with room for all of us and our memories and whatever comes next. Can I have my own room?" "You can have your own room." "Can Charlie the dragon have his own room?" Charlotte laughed. "Charlie can share your room. Dragons like company." Noah considered this. "Okay, that's fair." He yawned hugely. "Can we go home now? I'm tired." "Yeah, buddy." Ethan lifted him up, feeling the familiar weight of his son against his chest. "We can go home." They walked to the elevator together, Ethan carrying Noah, Charlotte's hand in his, and for a moment Ethan thought about everything that had led them here, the accident that had destroyed his world, the 3 years of grief that had felt endless, the declined card at a Starbucks on a random Monday morning, the crumpled $10 bill that had changed everything. 1 year later, almost to the day, the three of them stood outside that same Starbucks. It was morning, the kind of bright March morning that made Manhattan feel like a place where anything was possible. They were on their way to work and school, running the kind of errands that had become routine in the years since the wedding. "This is the place," Noah said, pointing at the door. "Where you guys met." "This is the place," Charlotte confirmed. "Can we go in?" They went in. The Starbucks looked exactly the same counter, the same pastry display, the same line of impatient professionals waiting for their morning caffeine. Ethan felt the memory wash over him, Charlotte's embarrassed face, the rejected card, the impulse that had made him reach past her with a handful of crumpled bills. They ordered Charlotte's usual oat milk latte, Ethan's black coffee, hot chocolate for Noah, and Charlotte pulled out her corporate card. It went through without a problem. "Declined cards fixed, I see," Ethan said, smiling. "Finally got that sorted out." Charlotte smiled back. "Only took a year and a complete restructuring of my accounting department." The barista called their names, and they moved to the pickup counter together, the same counter where Ethan had once stood beside a stranger, not knowing that she would become his whole world. "I got it," Ethan said, reaching for Charlotte's coffee before she could. "You don't have to—" "I know." He handed her the cup, his fingers brushing hers. "But I want to. Just in case." Charlotte's eyes glistened. "Just in case of what?" "Just in case the universe needs reminding." He leaned in and kissed her softly. "That some things are worth paying for." They walked out into the Manhattan morning together, not just two people anymore, but a family. Noah ran ahead, excited about something he'd seen in a store window. Charlotte and Ethan followed more slowly, their hands intertwined, their steps matched. "You know what I was thinking?" Charlotte said. "What?" "A year ago, if someone had told me that my life would be completely different, that I would be married, that I would have a son, that I would be happier than I ever thought possible, I would have said they were crazy. And now? Now I think maybe the craziest thing was believing I could be happy alone." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Ethan, for paying for my coffee, for not giving up on me, for showing me what love can be." "Thank you for seeing me," Ethan said quietly, when no one else did. They caught up with Noah, who was pressed against a toy store window, pointing excitedly at a display of stuffed dragons. "Look, they have a Charlie! They have a whole dragon family," Charlotte observed. "Should we get some friends for Charlie?" Noah's face lit up. "Can we?" "We can do whatever we want," Ethan said. "We're a family." They went into the toy store together, emerging 10 minutes later with 3 new dragons, one for Noah, one for Charlotte's office, and one that Noah insisted should live in Ethan's desk at work so he doesn't get lonely when we're at school. The morning sun was warm on their faces as they walked toward their separate destinations. Noah to school, Ethan and Charlotte to Tech Vision, all of them to the lives they were building together. "Same time tomorrow?" Charlotte asked at the corner where they would part ways. "Same time always," Ethan said. He kissed her goodbye, then knelt down to Noah's level. "Have a good day, buddy. I love you." "I love you too, Dad." Noah hugged him tight. "And tell Marcus that dragons are definitely not overpowered. He's wrong about that." "I'll pass along the message." Ethan watched them go, his son and his wife walking together toward the school bus stop, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. Charlotte was holding Noah's hand, laughing at something he'd said, looking more beautiful than she had any right to be on a random Tuesday morning. "This," Ethan thought, "this is what I almost missed. This is what grief almost stole from me. This is what a crumpled $10 bill bought. A family. A future. A second chance at everything." He turned and walked toward Tech Vision Tower, where his work waited, where the Cole Initiative was already changing lives, where Marcus would want to hear about the dragons and the breakfast and all the small, perfect moments that made up a happy life. Behind him, the Starbucks continued its morning business, serving coffee to strangers who might or might not be meeting their futures. And somewhere in the universe, perhaps, Sarah Cole smiled at the family her husband had found. Not a replacement for what he'd lost, but a continuation of the love she'd wanted for him all along. The declined card that had embarrassed a CEO and brought a security guard out of the shadows had built something beautiful, something lasting, something real. And the story that began with a $5 cup of coffee ended with something worth infinitely more. The simple, extraordinary miracle of being chosen, of being loved, of walking into an uncertain future with people who would never let you face it alone. Ethan Cole had learned in the hardest possible way that life could be brutal and unfair and full of losses that never fully healed. But he had also learned something else, something that changed everything. That second chances were real, that love could grow from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes when everything seemed lost, the universe had a way of putting you exactly where you needed to be. All you had to do was show up. All you had to do was pay attention. All you had to do was be brave enough to say yes.